We are going live. All right, welcome to everyone joining. We're going to start in about 3 minutes. I know this is a heavily registered for event and I see the participants going up rapidly, so we are excited to see everyone. As is tradition for a Sunday CE, if you can open the chat box and leave where you're coming from. We love to see where everyone's coming from around the US and even around the world.
Morning,
Park
everyone.
City.
Awesome.
All right, welcome to everyone joining. Yeah, go ahead and open up that chat box and kind of put the city or the state that you're coming from. It's a good morning exercise before we get started.
So terrific. Still negative, question mark.
You know, we're in Texas, so my Texas colleagues are probably just pouring up their mimosas right now. So.
Oh, the chat's disabled. No wonder why no one was responding. Hey, Dad, can you take a look at that?
Yeah.
I'm glad we did that.
Okay, you go ahead and disable the chat really fast.
I'm gonna take a cough pill.
That's weird.
Yeah, it was like 430 people and no one wants to tell us where they're coming from. It seems a little strange.
Don't you love the Zoom in the beginning?
Yeah.
Oh, every time.
Go my hair, put on my makeup and get a better top on.
All right, welcome to everyone joining. We're going to start in just a minute. Just have one technical difficulty.
Chat off.
Yeah, for all the attendees, looks like the chat is temporarily disabled, so give us just a second here.
Okay, cool, perfect. It is on.
It's on. All right, so attendees, if you can try leaving where you're from again, that'd be great, just so we can make sure this chat is working. Perfect. Yeah, it's working. Great. There we go.
There you go. Much
I was gonna say hi to all these. This is going a little too quickly.
Now they're all coming in at the same time. Wow.
That's great. Yeah, looks like we got representation from pretty much the whole
There you
US.
go.
Perfect. All right, we got a great program today. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I know people are still funneling in. I'm gonna talk for a couple of minutes, pass it over to some sponsors, and then we're gonna jump right into our first CE lecture. So first thing, number one announcement, ODsonFinance Careers has been launched for about 2.5 months now. We've got hundreds of jobs posted on there already, a lot of profiles created. Remember, if you're a candidate, creating a profile is absolutely free. And if you're seeking a talented candidate, it's only $19 a month to list a job. It's about 10 times cheaper than anywhere else. So feel free to utilize it. And also if you want to sell a practice, $299 a month. We actually just had our first practice lead to sale, which was awesome. It only took a month for that practice to sell. So fantastic, no broker fees, everything's a la carte. And of course, if you need to refinance your student loans, we're the place to do it. Got great rates with Laurel Road and Splash Financial. So if you are interested in doing that, go ahead and scan the QR code on the right side of your screen. And we've got another event coming up, a non-CE event, but it's going to be part 2 of On the Path to Your Predominantly Private Pay Practice, which is always a tough title to say. Steve Alexander is going to present some great information. It's a follow-up to 2 weeks ago. So if you were at that one, I know there's about 500 of you at that one. Definitely register for this one because it'll all make a lot more sense if you watch this one. And with that being said, we're going to jump right into sponsor presentations. And our first diamond sponsor is CooperVision. And you can't think of myopia management without thinking of CooperVision. So I am going to let Dr. Felicia Timmerman take over and talk a little bit about CooperVision.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate that. And I'm going to just switch on over here to my screen. Let's see. Okay. There we go. Well, happy Sunday, everyone. And thank you so much to the ODsonFinance team. We really appreciate this opportunity. And I'm really excited to share some of the different products we have at CooperVision to address progressive myopia in children. So as mentioned, I'm Dr. Felicia Timmerman, and I'm the manager of myopia management. So when we think of myopia, many feel that myopia management should be the standard of care. And the good news is that the World Council of Optometry has already established it as such. And you may be familiar with this statistic here. By 2050, 50% of the global population is predicted to have myopia. So we know that the prevalence is already there, and it's just going to continue to rise with time. And there's no better population to address this with than the pediatric population, because this is where we're going to see the onset, as well as we're going to have the biggest impact in controlling that progression. So as you can see from the chart, you can see that myopia onset is already starting at early ages. And one startling statistic is that we already see that about 1 in 4 have 3 diopters or more of myopia by that mid to early teenage range. So we're going to talk about the significance of that number here just shortly. Another thing that we have here too is our colleague, Dr. Justin Kwan with CooperVision, really looked at the overall prevalence of myopia in the US with his research team. And what they found is just under 20 million children in the US have myopia. So if we take all of the eye care professionals, optometrists, as well as ophthalmologists, that means that all ECPs would have to see 278 children per year in order to address this. So that tells us there's an opportunity, as well as the overall volume of children living with this condition. So to go back to that startling number of -3, why is that so important? Well, because what you can see from this graph here is that at that level of myopia, the overall risk of developing conditions later in life that are associated with myopia increase significantly. So though our goal is to prevent myopia as much as possible, or to keep children at that lowest level, what we really want to do is try to keep these children at least under -3, at least through high school, because we know that can have an overall major impact on their quality of life, as well as their visual and ocular health. So myopic maculopathy is one of those conditions that we're really trying to prevent, and really with the slowing of the progression. And through thousands of peer-reviewed articles, what we know is that that average age of onset is just under 48 years old. And that's important because we know that a significant portion of our population of patients that we're seeing could be living a large portion of their life with this condition, with the visual impairment, as well as the chronic management of it. So at CooperVision, we're really proud of the portfolio that we have in order to address myopia progression. And of course, that includes our contact lenses. I apologize for the dog. Our contact lenses, which is the MiSight one-day dual focus contact lens, which is FDA approved for myopia control, as well as our orthokeratology lenses with Paragon CRT, as well as IC with GP specialists. We're eagerly awaiting that the single vision glasses for myopia management with Sight Glass Vision. So we're eagerly awaiting that FDA approval. So how did MiSight get that FDA approval? Well, this is just an overview of that research. So as you can see here in that part 1, that's where we were able to demonstrate with refractive error, that's 59% slowing of the progression of refractive error. And then when part 2, when we transitioned those children that were in the control lenses to the MiSight, we were able to also see that we were able to slow that progression, as well as we were also still able to retain that slowing of progression in those that were originally fit in the MiSight lenses. And then of course, in the part 3, this is where we took the children out of the MiSight lenses to look to see if there was any rebound effect. And the good news is that we didn't see any. So all that benefit that we obtained with the MiSight lenses were retained after discontinuation. And this graph here just shows the axial length. And this is just another portion of being able to demonstrate how we were able to slow that progression of myopia from an axial length standpoint. And what you can see in part 1, when you compare the orange line, which is the control lens, to the purple line, which was the MiSight lenses, you can see those children that were in the control progressed at about a 2 to 3 times higher rate than those were in the MiSight lenses. So this is just another perspective of being able to demonstrate how the MiSight lenses are effective in slowing that overall progression. And one thing that we are excited to bring to our patients is, of course, that prescription savings card, where patients are able to save $200 off an annual supply, either through our 90 packs as well as our 180 packs, as well as we were able to extend the parameters of MiSight lenses to include a -650 lens as well as a -7. So thank you guys so much for your time and attention. I apologize from the warm welcome from my dog as well there in the middle, but we really look forward to the agenda today. And thank you again to the team with ODsonFinance for allowing us this opportunity.
All right. Thank you very much, Felicia. That was a fantastic presentation. And of course, Cooper Vision just has great products when it comes to myopia management. So and let's go ahead and jump over to our next diamond sponsor, and that is going to be Done For You Marketing. So Trish Olson is going to present here. Of course, once you implement myopia management into your practice, you got to find a way to market it to get it out to the general public. And that's where Trish and Done For You comes in. So I'll let you take over, Trish.
All right. And coming over here. You just taught me how to do all this, and I need to share my screen.
View. View.
Thank you.
Oh,
There
wait.
we go.
There you go.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me okay?
It sounds good.
All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and maybe almost good night to some of you. So so happy to be here. I'm Trish Olson. I manage the Done For You marketing service that we provide, and I love that I found ODsonFinance. Hey, Aaron and Dat, thank you for including us. I know marketing is a little bit of a weird topic when it comes to going into the finance side. So, without further ado, Done For You marketing really was developed to help private practices get the word out to their patients, help them drive growth into the clinic. And we wanted to help with that, that effort. So back in 2015, I really, I work with ADO Practice Solutions. I work with Wallman. I work with a lot of practices, and I did a little bit of surveying. I came from more of the audiology side of the business back for marketing, and I had an ad agency in that industry, and I need to learn a little bit more about the eye care industry. And so I surveyed our members, other customers, and really based on marketing, they were saying, I don't want to do it. I want someone else to do it. I don't know how to do it, and I don't even know if it works. And so with that, we came up with Done For You marketing, and literally, without being fancy, it means that we take on all the marketing for that practice, okay? So really, what does that mean? We're looking for, helping with personalized marketing, and we're not templated. Templates are fine, but we're looking for branding that practice. We're looking at ways to be strategic and driving that return on investment. We do track everything that we do. So if you work with us and you say that you want to drive new patients in the door, or if you want to get your inactive patients in, we are going to do that for you based on best practices. We're also going to show you those analytics. So you're not thinking, oh, well, did it work? Did it not work? You will know if it worked or not. And then affordability. There's a lot of packages out there, and I think that there's a lot of great marketing companies out there, but I decided to go with a flat fee approach. And so it's a monthly fee. And then, of course, just like having a marketing manager, you pay that salary, and then any hard costs on top of that for postage or direct mail or Facebook ads itself. Those are things that would be on top of that. But our main focus is, just like you guys, increase your capture rate, increase your revenue per patient, increase private pay for sure, and maximizing those third-party plans. So those are our main focuses when working with practices. Capability-wise, think of us as you're hiring us as your marketing manager. We handle all of your marketing, not just pieces of it. So capability-wise, when I say for the monthly fee, it's digital, it's social media, it's event management, brand development, tracking, medical, optical, retail marketing. I have a new program to share with you specifically for myopia management. But think of us as your marketing manager with the backing of a full-service ad agency, okay? And this is an example. This is Darren Brown. She's actually one of our senior marketing managers, and she's been with me for over 4.5 years. And she will do these things. She's your one point of contact when you sign on with us. She's proactive at communication. You are not trying to track her down to figure out what's going on with your marketing. This person is, Darren specifically, or other marketing managers, are going to have a great cadence with you when it comes to communication. It's full planning and implementation. So again, you're hiring your own marketing manager to handle all marketing for you, not just the start of it, giving you great ideas and you implement. It's great ideas plus implementation. And what I keep saying is we manage all of your marketing, anything you can think of, patient communications, your marketing, reputation management, reviews. We work hand in hand with recall systems, electronic recall systems. We do work with a lot of the ODsonFinance partners like Cooper, like Dr. Contact Lens, like Roya. We are more about kind of facilitating those efforts. So best practice sharing, and like I just said, full vendor management. So when someone calls you, and I always say this example is Yelp calls you and says, hey, got a great deal for you. You send that person on to us as your marketing representative, and we will have those conversations with those vendors and then come back to you with solutions, or does it make sense or not? So really think of us as that. New for this year, in the last couple of years, we too have been working on myopia management, getting patient communications out there, getting collateral in the office, if it's pricing sheets, anything that that practitioner needs to have a great conversation with the patient and make their life easier. We've been doing this now for over 1.5 years, and we just launched our program called Done For You Ready. And that could be myopia management, that could be dry eye, that could be vision therapy, anything that's more specialty for your clinic. We already have those best practices in place and how to kind of, like, I guess, the easy button to get you rocking and rolling. And so this is such a great opportunity today to go through this webinar with these great speakers, because we are ready to help you fully implement these programs for you, okay? Ready to drive revenue? That's honestly where we're at. I have been in marketing for over 20 years. If it doesn't drive revenue, I'm not interested. So I want to make sure that whatever we're doing, again, our program does not have contracts. And so I look at my team and say, we have to earn our customers' business every month. And if we're not doing that, we're doing something wrong. So I wholeheartedly mean that. For our ODsonFinance members, we do have a promo going on. So $500 if you were to sign up before August 31st for Done For You dollars. What that means is we have our monthly fee, and then you will get $500 to utilize to any hard costs, Facebook ads, so Google ads, printed, any of those extra materials, just by signing up by August 31st, okay? And then lastly, really to get started, I know there's a couple people on here right now that have already signed up for a marketing assessment. A marketing assessment is really to kind of level set everything. I could tell you everything we do, but it might not pertain to you. So what we do is we do a ton of research on your practice, and even new locations coming up, and we will guide you on what we think for your website and social media, reputation management with reviews, search engine optimization, and then really enhancing any of your current marketing. So we're going to give you some great takeaways, but also consult with you to see how we maybe could work together to take some of that off your plate. So it's complimentary. Feel free to reach out to me at Done For You, sales, or at my email address, and we'll get you signed up, and we'll talk to you more about what that looks like for your practice. Thank you, and thank you to ODsonFinance and Dad and Aaron. I really appreciate the time.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Trish, and thank you, Done For You. Fantastic opportunity for all the ODs out there. Let me jump back onto my screen real quick. All right, so kind of going through our sponsors. First of all, you had Cooper Vision. So Cooper Vision allows you the products to start your myopia management practice. Then you got Done For You. So you got the marketing, so you get it out there. All of a sudden, you're getting all these patients through your door. You're selling all these products. You're building a lot of revenue. Now you got some money, and you need to buy a house. And that's where Neo Home Loans comes in. So with the mortgages, and Josh is fantastic. He was our very first sponsor at ODsonFinance. We always have to recommend him as the OG. So Josh, tell us a little bit more about what you have going on at Neo Home Loans and what's happening in the markets right now.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Dat. Good to see everybody this morning. And yes, as Aaron mentioned, we are a residential mortgage lender. We lend in 49 states, so everywhere but New York. And rather than just talk about mortgage, which I find kind of boring, I love to teach. So do you mind if I share my screen for just 1 second, Aaron?
Yep.
Okay. It says, okay, there we go. We'll stop other share, no problem. There we go. So team, like I said, I love to teach. I love to talk about real estate and the markets. And we have had just a ton of questions about housing affordability, with interest rates going up and what might happen to housing with an economic recession that potentially is coming. So I thought I would just talk about that for just a few minutes. And then of course you can reach out to us if you have any specific mortgage questions. This is a chart of the Fed funds rate. And the reason why recession is being talked about so much, you may have heard about inverted yield curve, which means that, you know, the 1 and the 2 year bonds are yielding higher than the 10 and the 30 year bonds, which is a real recessionary indicator. And this is a chart showing that when the Federal Reserve aggressively tries to slow down the economy by raising rates, it often leads to recession. And what you'll see here is these red circles kind of at the top of the Fed funds raising rates, and then the gray bars thereafter are recession. Now, a lot of people are fearful of recessions because we have recency bias. We know the last recession before COVID, of course, was the Great Recession, and we had some real housing problems at that time. But typically, housing actually does pretty good in recessions. Why is that? It's because mortgage rates tend to come down in recessions. So you'll see here recessions going back to 1980, and you'll see the corresponding impact in interest rates. And so as interest rates go down, affordability in housing goes up, and housing actually tends to do pretty well. This is the Case-Shiller U.S. National Home Price Index through the last 9 recessions. And you'll see that through these recessions, housing actually goes sideways to up, except for the outlier, which was the Great Recession. Of course, that was because there was just a tremendous amount of mortgage debt bubble and bad underwriting practices at that time. If we look back specifically at the last 6 recessions, we'll actually see that in 4 of the last 6 economic recessions, housing prices went up. And in the 1991 recession, housing prices just went down 1.9%. The outlier, again, being the 2008 Great Recession, where housing prices really took a downward leap. Team, there's a lot of negative media news out around, whoops, I apologize. There's a lot of negative media news around housing. These are quotes from CNBC's lead real estate anchor, Diana Olick, going back to 2015, talking about housing bubbles and better to rent than buy and all these types of negative connotation around housing. And I just put this up here to point out that if you had tried to time the market based on these sound bites, the average American would have lost out on $222,000 in real estate appreciation since 2015. Doesn't mean everybody should buy, but time in the market tends to be a better performance than timing the market. And I believe that is the case again today. Final thing I wanted to share with you, and I'll turn this back over to you, Aaron. If you are interested in buying a home this year, you should know about the seller paid rate buy down strategy. With the housing market starting to slow a little bit, we're getting seller concessions. That's money from the seller that can be used to permanently buy down your interest rate. And instead of having an interest rate in the 5s and the 6s, you can buy that interest rate all the way down to the 4s in some instances. So I'll put this little link. You can download our white paper. If you're in the housing market, you should definitely download and learn about that strategy. And if you have any questions, I'll hang out for a moment. Feel free to put those questions in the chat. It was a pleasure being with you here today.
Awesome, Josh. Well, thank you for that presentation. As always, very informative and some great information for our audience out there. So feel free to reach out to Josh. Let me go ahead.
Thanks, Aaron.
Share back here, and you can scan that QR code as well. Now, everyone here is here because either you've got a flourishing myopia management practice or you're looking to create one. I assume you wouldn't be here otherwise. So if you are looking to create one, or if you're looking to continue to build, Vision by Design is happening. And this is happening at the end of September, September 28th to October 2nd in Bellevue, Washington. Scan that QR code, because what you're seeing today is about 3 hours of CE and a few discussions. Vision by Design is 4 days or 5 days of just intensive myopia management from every aspect, whether it be clinical, research, or practice management. So definitely sign up right there. We're going to be talking a little bit more about it, but we need to jump to our speaker. Our first speaker today is going to be coming on in just a couple minutes. Just a few disclaimers here. We are in the co-approved CE portion now. So if there are any poll questions, please answer those. There's gonna be a survey at the very end of this when you sign out, so make sure to answer all the questions there. And you gotta be present for the entirety of the 50 minutes, which is equivalent to an hour, to receive your CE credit. And CE certificates are gonna be sent out in about 3 to 4 weeks after the event. But if you have any questions, you can always email us. And with that being said, I'm gonna introduce our first speaker, and that is Dr. Anith Pillai. And he received his undergraduate degree from University of Texas at Austin and his Doctor of Optometry from the University of Houston College of Optometry. He's the co-owner of Evolutionary Eye Care, where he has a clinical emphasis in anterior segment disease, including keratoconus, specialty contact lenses, myopia management, and ocular surface disease. He's written articles and lectured on topics of squirrel lenses, ocular surface disease, orthokeratology, and practice management. He's an active member of the American Optometric Association and the Texas Optometric Association. He serves on the board of Harris County Optometric Society, on the board of American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control, and is the Texas leader of the Young ODs of America. And Anith is a fantastic individual when it comes to contact lenses. You've probably seen him on social media when you think about contact lenses. So Anith, I'm gonna pass it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. Thank you to all the sponsors. Thank you to the ODsonFinance team for putting this amazing event together. You know, when we were talking about doing this, Aaron mentioned, you know, when we get started, we want to probably end with our best presenter, our best lecturer. So why don't you go first? So that's where we started. All right. Okay, so I'll be starting talking about Ortho-K. These are my disclosures, won't have any impact on the lecture. I won't talk a lot about why we should do myopia control. I'll just have this one slide that shows every diopter increase in myopia has a 67% increase in maculopathy. The more myopia, the more the risk. There are better things we can do than just prescribing glasses and contacts for our progressive myopes, and Ortho-K is one of the tools that we have. What I will talk about is how Ortho-K works, defining the architecture, going over topography, and we'll end on troubleshooting some of the difficult cases or some of the things that happened even in my clinic. So what Ortho-K is, we're temporarily reshaping the front part of the eye. We're using an RGP to make this change on the corneal surface. And that's kind of the simple way of mentioning it. Now we'll go into exactly how all of this works, but simply use RGP and we're changing the front surface. And we're doing it by hydraulic forces. So we're using the tear film of the patient to make these changes in the corneal epithelium. And we'll go over of why this is so important. One of the biggest misconceptions about Ortho-K is that there's a mechanical component where we're actually smushing the cornea. There's no smushing going on. We're using a hydraulic force to make these changes into the epithelium. So this is what it looks like. On the bottom image is an Ortho-K mold. This is a slit lamp image with fluorescein, and the top is a depiction of the forces that are going on. So you have this central positive push force, and in the mid-periphery, you have this negative pull force. So we're using the tear film to create this osmotic gradient, okay? So you have a very thin layer of tears centrally, and then a steepening in that mid-periphery. So a positive push force centrally, a negative pull force in the mid-periphery. So we're not actually smushing anything. We're just having a gentle redistribution of cells and volume to make these changes on the corneal surface. So when you have this closed system, you can have this migration of cells and migration of volume purely from hydraulic forces. And I won't do too many histology slides, I promise, but I think this is important to see. And if you look centrally where we have this thin layer of tears, not only do you see there's a slightly less amount of cells, but it's the volume that's actually changing. So when you have this closed system of thin tear film centrally and thicker tear film in the mid-periphery, you're going to lose some fluid centrally and more fluid mid-peripherally. That's where that osmotic gradient happens. So those central cells will lose some cytoplasmic fluid and they'll actually thin out. And those mid-peripheral cells will gain some cytoplasmic fluid and they'll actually thicken. So if you look at the histology, you'll see it's not so much a big migration. While there is some, you'll see the cells themselves look thicker in the mid-periphery and the cells centrally are a lot thinner. So the osmotic gradient we're creating will actually create a thin and thick environment as well as a redistribution. And we know with Ortho-K, we're definitely changing the epithelium. The central epithelium will thin, the mid-peripheral epithelium will thicken, as I showed in the previous histology slide. But are there actually stromal changes? And what we find is, yeah, there is some in the mid-periphery. Now, centrally, it's mostly epithelial changes, though the epithelial cells will really thin out and the epithelial cells will thicken in the mid-periphery, but some of the stromal cells will also be affected. Now, what we find is it's not really impacting the refractive changes. So all the myopia reduction, or you can even do hyperopic reduction, but we won't talk too much about that today. The refractive changes will be epithelial. The stromal changes that happen in the mid-periphery aren't impacting the refractive outcomes as much. Now, are we having any endothelial issues here? You know, we want to make sure the endothelial cells are nice and safe. We don't want any compromise there. And they looked at a lot of cases, and after 1 year, 2 year, and even 7-year studies, what we found out, yeah, endothelium's safe. We're not causing too many problems to this endothelial cell. So we can pretty much be safe that with orthokeratology, yeah, we got some epithelial changes, some stromal changes in the mid-periphery, but the endothelium is pretty much safe, not causing any clinically significant alteration to the endothelium. And this will be the last histology slide, I promise. So again, you see the thinning and thickening that's happening centrally and then into the mid-periphery. It's not as much of a migration. While there is still cellular migration, but you can clearly see the cells are thicker. There's thin ones in the center and there's thick ones in the mid-periphery. So that osmotic gradient that we created from that closed loop from the mold is pushing out that cytoplasmic fluid. So the central epithelial cells are thinning out. We're still pushing some into the mid-periphery, and those mid-peripheral cells are actually thickening as well because of that osmotic gradient. So let's go into the design itself. So this is what an Ortho-K architecture looks like. You have a central base curve where it looks like bearing centrally. We'll talk about why it's not actual bearing in just a second. And then you'll have a steepening in that second curve, which is called the reverse curve. Then you'll have another area of what looks like bearing, which is the alignment curve. And then a final area of edge lift, which is the peripheral curves. Now in Ortho-K, there's a lot of different designs. So you can have multiple alignment curves, multiple reverse curves, multiple peripheral curves. But this is the general architecture of almost every Ortho-K design. You'll have this central base curve, which is flatter, then a steepening up into the reverse curve, and then the alignment curve, which comes back down towards the cornea, and another area of edge lift with the peripheral curve. So let's start with the base curve. That's that central area that looks bearing with that red arrow. And next to it is the topography image that shows the corresponding changes. What the base curve is, it's the central part of the Ortho-K mold, and it's purely responsible for treatment effect. Now I mentioned there's no smushing of the cornea, right? You saw the histology slides. We're using a closed system of tear film manipulation to make sure that we can change the cellular effect. So we're not actually mechanically compressing. We're not having any central touch. We're just redistributing the cells, but also change the volume of the cells. So the base curve for Ortho-K is specifically for treatment effect. Now, if there's anybody in the audience that does a lot of corneal RGPs, whether it's for emetropia or keratoconus or ectasias, you're used to changing the base curve to alter the fit. You got to get that out of your head for Ortho-K. In Ortho-K, this is not the curve to change the fit. All right, there are other curves that are responsible for that. But for the base curve, in Ortho-K specifically, it is for treatment effect only. So if you have an improperly fitting design, base curve is not your go-to. That's not the one that you're going to be messing with. All right. And the reason is the data that's used to calculate a base curve in Ortho-K is central K values and your refraction. All right. So when you're doing your manifest refraction and you have central Ks, those are pretty accurate data points. Those are usually not the ones you're going to be changing too much. So in Ortho-K troubleshooting, base curve is very rarely changed because you got pretty good data points to start off with. So again, base curve, treatment effect, nothing to do with fitting. All right. And just to prove it to you, here's a tear film analysis of what an Ortho-K design looks like. The bottom image is the molds on the cornea, basically a slit lamp image with fluorescein. And the top is a tear film depiction of what that tear layer looks like underneath the design. So centrally, while it looks like bearing at the slit lamp, you can see there's a thin layer of tear films. That's typically anywhere from about 5 to 15 microns or so, depending on what design you're using. And again, we don't want compression because that'll actually cause corneal compromise. If you're having true bearing at the base curve, you'll see keratitis, and that's not a clinical outcome we want to see with Ortho-K. We shouldn't be seeing any central staining. That shows that we're actually too flat. So we do need a thin layer of tear film underneath the base curve. And the reason why it looks like bearing at the slit lamp is purely due to the molecular weight of fluorescein. So when you instill a fluorescein strip, if you have less than about 20 to 25 microns, it's going to look black at the slit lamp. And again, that's because of the molecular weight. So you can have actual clearance underneath the lens, but not have it highlight with fluorescein at your slit lamp. That's just because you need a certain volume for you to actually visualize at the slit lamp. Now, if you actually have the exact tear film analysis, you'll see there'll be a thin layer, again, about 5 to 15 microns underneath that corneal mold. So we're using the hydraulic forces to cause a central flattening and a mid-peripheral steepening with Ortho-K, and the base curve is not mechanical compression, it's using those hydraulic forces. And if we actually were to flat, you would see significant SPK centrally. So remember, base curve, not your fitting curve. It's purely for treatment effect. And just to make sure everybody believes me that there is no compression at the base curve, this is an OCT image of a corneal mold on the eye. So you can see centrally where that base curve is, there's a thin layer. We're not compressing anything on the corneal tissue. We're using the hydraulic forces to make those topographical changes. We're controlling the myopic or astigmatic or hyperopic refraction. Base curve is purely for treatment effect. And if I didn't say it enough, nothing to do with the fitting, purely for refractive error correction. So when we're making changes, it's when we over or under correct. So if we're not getting enough of myopia correction, we need to alter the base curve. If we're overcorrecting too much, we need to alter the base curve. If it's not fitting properly, we don't alter the base curve. All right, so purely for treatment effect. So if you start to see visual complaints and there's residual myopia or there's residual hyperopia, then that's where base curve changes will need to be made. Now, let's go to the next curve, the reverse curve. And on the left, you'll see the fluorescein image of that nice steepening effect with the corresponding topographical changes with that red ring. So the reverse curve is what is right adjacent to the base curve. In the tear film analysis, you'll see a rapid steepening in the reverse curve. This will have, depending on the amount of myopia you're correcting, it can be anywhere from 70 to 100 microns of tear film underneath that reverse curve. So the bottom image is the corneal mold and what it looks like with fluorescein at the slit lamp. And that top image is depicting the actual tear film underneath the reverse curve. And you can see that ramping up happens pretty quickly into that reverse curve. It is by far the steepest portion of an Ortho-K design. So the reverse curve is used to raise and lower the sagittal depth of the system. So if the Ortho-K mold is sitting too close to the cornea or sitting too far off, reverse curve is a good place to start to making those modifications. So if that amount of apical clearance centrally is not adequate, the reverse curve is where you want to make those modifications. It's also where where the magic happens in Ortho-K. So the reason Ortho-K has a myopia control effect is for peripheral myopic defocus, which I'm sure almost everybody has heard of. So what happens is we want to have a ray of light that focuses in the macula so the patient can see clearly, but in the periphery, we want those light rays to come a little bit in front of the retina. And that's where the peripheral myopic defocus happens. And the reverse curve is responsible for creating that. So that rapid steepening you're seeing in the tear film is creating a red ring in the topography where it's a lot more plus. So similar with peripheral defocus contacts or multifocal contact lenses for myopia control, where we're adding that plus in the periphery, we're actually making that change onto the corneal surface. So we have that defocus ring in the periphery of the retina. And that is all happening at the reverse curve. So it can be used in fitting relationships, certainly, to raise and lower the mold closer or further away from the cornea, but it also creates the myopia control effect. Again, that's the peripheral myopic defocus ring I was talking about, which happens in the red ring in topography. So when do you want to modify the curve? Well, if you have fitting issues, this is a good place to start. If you want to raise and lower the system, the reverse curve is absolutely responsible for the sagittal height of the corneal mold. So if the retainer is decentering superiorly or inferiorly, this is probably the first curve you want to consider in changing. Now, I'll use terms retainer, molds, kind of interchangeably. Each practitioner can decide what they want to use. I try not to use contact lens as much because in Ortho-K, it's really a treatment effect. It's not a traditional contact lens. We're using this RGP to make modifications on the corneal surface to get a treatment effect. So molds, retainers, whatever you guys want to use, I'll use them interchangeably throughout the presentation. Next up, the alignment curve. So this is another area that looks like bearing. And you'll see in the following slides, we're actually closer to the cornea and the alignment curve than even the base curve. And the topography shows the nice blue area outside of the red ring. That's where the alignment curve is doing its work. So you'll see the red arrow showing it on the fluorescein image. And then the blue area outside of the peripheral plus ring from the reverse curve, that's where the alignment curve is landing on the cornea. On the tear film analysis, you can see here, outside of that steepening in the reverse curve, you get down to the alignment curve where you're actually landing tangentially to the cornea. So this is an area of more of actual bearing than even the base curve. Now, you still don't want to see any keratitis in this area, but this is really landing much closer to the cornea than the base curve. And that's important because, as the name says, you want to align in this curve. This is very important in centration. The alignment curve, you're going to align the mid-peripheral cornea. What's important here is having good topographies. We'll get more into that a little bit later because central Ks are not going to be important in fitting as much. Remember, the central Ks are used in addition to refraction of determining the base curve selection. But we already mentioned base curve is purely for refractive error correction. When we want to align an Ortho-K mold, the alignment curve is where that happens. So the mid-peripheral data is going to be very important. So centration issues, alignment issues, this is the moneymaker, okay? This is where you're making probably most of your changes. So when you have decentration in an Ortho-K design, alignment curve needs to be modified. I won't go too deep into eccentricity, but I think it's important to go over at least a little bit. So what eccentricity means is the rate of flattening from the center to the periphery. So when you have a lower eccentricity value, your alignment curve needs to be steeper. When I say lower eccentricity, I mean the actual number, okay? So a 0.4 is lower than a 0.6, the actual absolute value of that number. When you have a lower number in the eccentricity, the alignment curve needs to be steeper. And if you have a higher eccentricity, the flatter the alignment curve needs to be. Let's take a look at why. So if we look at that top image, these are all corneas with the same central K. They're all 42.75. Now you can see as those curves change in the periphery, they're very different. And the alignment curves need to be different to align properly to have a good treatment effect. So you see a 0.6 eccentricity is flatter than a 0.4. That's where I want to go over that definition of eccentricity. It's the rate of flattening from center to periphery. So the higher the number, the quicker it flattens. So a 0.6 will be flatter in the mid-periphery than a 0.4. And that's why the lower the eccentricity number, the steeper the alignment curve can be, as you can see in this depiction. That 0.4 eccentricity needs a steeper alignment curve because it's steepened much faster than the 0.6 in the mid-periphery. And that's why topography is so important in Ortho-K. Central Ks are not enough. If you just have the central Ks, this 42.75 central K, and didn't have any idea about the eccentricity or how that mid-peripheral cornea looks like, these are all different patients. They're all not going to align properly. So you need to have that peripheral data because you're aligning in the mid-periphery with the alignment curve. Base curve only for vision correction. The alignment happens in the mid-periphery. Just to reiterate, the lower the number of the eccentricity, the steeper your alignment curve needs to be. And the higher the actual value of the eccentricity, the flatter the alignment curve needs to be. And you can see that here again. A 0.6 needs to be flatter, than a 0.4, which needs to be a lot steeper in the alignment curve. And when you have centration issues, that's when the alignment curve needs to be modified. So if you're used to modifying base curves in your traditional RGP fits, just switch base curve with alignment curve. That's the one that you need to modify. That's where all the centration, where all the fitting issues are happening in Ortho-K is in the alignment curve, and then to a degree in the reverse curve as well. And you want 360 degrees of mid-peripheral alignment. So if you have an area where that alignment curve isn't exactly tangential to the cornea, you're gonna have a fitting issue. So it will decenter, it won't cause a proper treatment effect. So you'll have a less than positive outcome when your alignment curve isn't aligned all the way around. Last but not least, our peripheral curve. So on the fluorescein image, you can see with the red arrow, that's the area of edge lift on the Ortho-K design. And in the topography, it'll be further out than even the alignment curve on that blue circle. The peripheral edge here in the tear film, it's close to the amount of tear film as the reverse curve. It just depends on the designs you're looking at. The higher the myopia you're correcting, the reverse curve will steepen up a little bit faster, but you want a nice area of edge lift, very similar to any other RGP design. The edge lift provides tear exchange, all right? We want to make sure that these corneas are staying healthy. We don't want it to be closed off in the far periphery as well. We can have corneal compromise. These kids are going to be sleeping in these Ortho-K molds for several years. We want to make sure there's a healthy exchange of tears underneath these molds. Now, you don't want to have complete seal off because of the tear exchange, but you don't want too much edge lift either because it's very uncomfortable. For those of you that fit RGPs, you know, if they have too much edge lift, even in a scleral design, if you have too much edge lift, the patient's going to have awareness, and you'll want to modify that to make sure that they're a little bit more comfortable. So you want enough to have that tear exchange underneath it, but not too much where you're causing comfort issues. And when you see this kind of the scattered keratitis on your post-op visits, then you'll note to just that peripheral curve. You want to make sure that tear film is getting underneath these designs. If the patient is really complaining of discomfort, then you know the edge lift probably needs to be steepened up a little bit, and you have too much edge lift. So if there's debris coming up underneath the design as well, that's where the peripheral curve can be adjusted. And in some designs, it can also help with centration issues. Now we'll get into topography. So a question I get a lot from doctors is, I want to get into Ortho-K. Do I need topography? Now, there's a lot of designs out there where you can order from Ks, you can send them HVID, you can even monitor how the outcome is by checking their acuity and doing overfraction over the molds, see how it's looking at the slit lamp. All those tools are at your disposal without having to use topography. I say, yes, you need it. I think to properly do Ortho-K, you need topography, and you'll be doing a disservice to your patients if you're not utilizing topography for Ortho-K. There's just too much information that's going on in the mid-periphery that you don't have if you're just relying on auto-Ks or keratometer and refraction. As I mentioned with eccentricity, you can see a central K of 43 is different for all different patients. That eccentricity will vary, and you're fitting the mid-peripheral of the cornea. That's the data you need. And to monitor outcomes, an RGP could look great at slit lamp, but you have no idea what's going on while the child is sleeping at night. And that's where topography really shows that information. There's many cases where I'll see the patient come in, put the Ortho-K mold on the eye, and at the slit lamp, doesn't look too great. It might decenter inferiorly, it looks flat out horrible, okay? But I look at the topography and it looks like this. Well, I'm gonna trust my topography because that shows me what's happening while the child is sleeping. Remember, Ortho-K is designed in a closed eye environment. Eyes are closed, child's sleeping. While you're looking at it at the slit lamp, child's awake, they're standing upright, and they're blinking all the time. It's a completely different fitting modality. So if you're doing Ortho-K, make the investment to get topography. And these are the different types. I actually use all these different types on the topographer when I'm doing an Ortho-K evaluation and following up post visits. So let's dive into what each one does and the importance of them. So this is what an axial map looks like. This is probably what most of us are used to seeing on our topographers. What the axial map is good for is visualizing the treatment zone. Now, when I say treatment zone, I'm talking about this nice blue area in the center, okay? That's where we're having the myopia reduction. So making sure that the patient can see clearly, making sure that it's actually uniform within the pupil area. It's not too big, not too small. When I look at an axial map, I'm visualizing just that blue area. I'm only thinking about treatment effect when I'm looking at this with this axial map. So when do we make modifications based on axial map findings? Well, if there's not enough treatment in the pupil zone, right? If you're having too small of a treatment zone, you can have halos and glare with patients, especially if you're doing Ortho-K for adults, where you're not as concerned with myopia control, but just visual correction. And if it's too large, meaning that that blue ring is outside the pupil area, then you're not really doing myopia control anymore. They're not going to get that peripheral defocus like you want. So visualizing that treatment zone, the axial map is your go-to map for that. And using difference maps help. So having the baseline topography and then comparing that to the post-op visit and seeing what that difference is. And most of the topographies nowadays can do that. So treatment zone visualization, axial map is my go-to. This is a tangential map. Now, these are all topographies from my patients, and these are the exact same topography from the exact same patient at the same time. The only thing I'm changing is the view. So that axial map you saw before, all I did was change the view of my topographer to tangential, and this is now the view. Okay, so I'm not changing patients, I'm not changing time of the capture. Same image, just changing the view. Tangential map is our shape map. So this shows me how things are centering after Ortho-K treatment. So I'm really looking at that red ring, mostly when I'm looking at a tangential map. I want to make sure that I have a nice, well-formed red ring. That shows me that I'm having a good peripheral plus in the retina, or I'm inducing it in the retina at least. And I want to make sure that I'm getting some of that red ring within the pupil area. In this particular topographer, that black circle that you see, that faint black circle is highlighting the pupil margin. So I want to make sure I'm getting some of that red ring inside the pupil area. That's what's going to induce the peripheral myopic defocus to ensure I have good myopia control treatment effect. So if it's decentering laterally or up or down, the tangential map is really good at visualizing that. And you'll make reverse curve modifications, alignment curve modifications with looking at the tangential map. So when you have fit issues, tangential map is the best one to look at. That's where I'll see, hey, I'm having decentration inferiorly. I need to make this change to the alignment curve. I'm having decentration issues laterally. I need to make this change to the alignment or reverse curve. So any type of centration issues, I really, really lean on my tangential maps. And again, it'll be difference maps. So you'll have the baseline topography, then you select the post-op topography, and you'll do a comparison, and it'll shows you the changes that are happening after overnight wear. And then the refractive map. This is very similar to an axial map. They look similar if you remember what they look like on the previous slides. This also shows basically the treatment effect. I love using the refractive map. Now, not all topographers have this, but if yours does, one great way to use the refractive map is to see how much vision you corrected. So a lot of these patients are young kids, and you can't always rely on their manifest refraction. And if you're great at retinoscopy, great, that's an objective data point. But you could also use your refractive map. So if you do a difference, compare your baseline to your post-treatment and do a difference map in the refractive map mode, you can actually click in the center part of this topography, and you're able to see how much myopia you're correcting. And that's a great tool to walk into the room knowing, hey, I've already fully corrected that child, and I don't have to lean so much on a unreliable manifest refraction. So again, very similar to the axial map in visualizing the treatment zone, but it's a great tool to have on hand when before you even walk into the room, you can see about how much vision you corrected. And the elevation map, this actually shows you the differences in the principal meridian of elevation compared to a best fit sphere. I use the elevation map on pre-fit designs. I don't really use it on post-treatment as much, but when I'm designing an Ortho-K mold and I need to know, do I need to go toric or do I need to go spherical? I'll use the elevation map for that. And this is a pretty good gauge to go by. So your topographer can calculate this for you. So and you can select a chord. Typically most Ortho-K designs you should be around an 8mm chord, because that's where your alignment curve will land. But talk to the labs to see what they recommend. But whatever chord that they say is best, if you have greater than 25 microns of elevation, you likely need a toric Ortho-K design. If you're under that 25 micron threshold, you can probably go spherical. And again, this is an elevation difference at the principal meridians. Now, we talked about what maps to use in topography. None of that matters if you have garbage data to start off with. I mentioned how important topography is in designing Ortho-K. Even more important, getting good images. And you really got one shot at a good baseline. So take your time with getting great images. So let's take a look at some good captures. I had images of the Placido ring in addition to what the color map looks like. Now, if you have something that's not Placido based, great, then you don't have to worry about a lot of the tear film issues. Majority of topographers out there are Placido based. So it's important to visualize those Placido rings. If you look at the left image, you'll see they're nice and concentric, no breakups. That's important because Placido based topography is really relying on tear film. So if you have a patient that has severe dry eyes or they're just staring prior to the image, you'll see that disruption in the Placido rings. So make sure, before you even analyze what the topography looks like, look at those rings, make sure that the rings are actually nice and uniform so that you're starting off with good data and not having artifacts from a poor tear film. And then when we move to the right image, you want to make sure lids and lashes are out of the way. This topography is beautiful. You see the entire cornea imaged. You don't see any lashes in the way, no lids in the way causing any artifacts. So this is what I would consider a good image capture. Another great image capture here. Basically, the entire cornea is imaged, no lids and lashes in the way. These are the type of topography that you need to have a successful Ortho-K design.
Hey,
The
Anith,
baseline.
sorry to interrupt you. Your slides are behind by like 4 slides.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, what we're seeing is the subtractive map, the refractive map slide.
Oh, goodness. All right. I don't know if that's my internet or what.
Do you want to go out of presenter mode and come back in?
Sure. Let's see.
Sorry to interrupt you. Everyone's like, where are you?
Oh, gosh. So sorry about that. Okay. Okay. I stopped share. And let's get back in. Thank you for interrupting. Gosh, I would have just kept on going. You guys wouldn't know what I was talking about.
Some people were on, some people were off. So now it's good. Now you're on the image capture slide.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right, so just reiterating, need good images to start off with. Okay. So these are the good images. So here's an example of a very poor capture. Hopefully, and maybe Brianna, you can interrupt me again. Can you see the poor capture?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So not much of the cornea is imaged. Lids and lashes are in the way. You can't make a properly designed Ortho-K mold with this information. This is even worse. There's just so much artifact. All this data is unreliable. So if you started an Ortho-K design based on this topography, who knows how it would even fit? None of this is reliable at all. It's all artifacts. And even this, I would consider this a poor capture. Now, I know a lot of you thinking, listen, and that's not practical. Not everybody gets those beautiful topographies every single time. This should be good enough, right? I mean, you got most of the cornea imaged. It's not terrible, right? Can't you design off of this? I would say no. This, and I know these are my patients. These images are the ones from our practice. So I get that we get poor captures at times, but this is something you have to keep going after. Taking multiple images, let the kid take a break and put drops in, have multiple techs help. You got to get good baseline topography because that's what you need to have a successful outcome right off the get-go. Once you start with the baseline topography like this for your design, it's going to just create a nightmare. These are the cases where you'll see them 10, 12 times, where if you just had a great topography to start off with, you could probably nail it down in one. So I would actually say this is not a good enough baseline topography to start Ortho-K. And guess what? You know, if you're not getting good baseline topography, then maybe there's not a great candidate. Maybe they're not ready for it. Maybe you should consider other modalities. That's my personal belief. If you're not getting the great baseline topography, that's one of the bullet points for candidacy in mind for Ortho-K. Okay. Now, when things go wrong, these are all the most common complications that happen with Ortho-K. And smiley face, this is an actual term that us Ortho-K docs use. It's called smiley face. All that means is that we're riding a little too high. The mold is actually decentering superiorly. And the reason we call it a smiley face, if you look at the difference map, which is the rightmost image on the topography, you'll see that kind of red line that goes across. It looks like a smile and smiley face. But again, all it means is superior decentration. Now, what causes a superior decentered design is too little sagittal depth. So you're getting a little too close to the cornea. So if we want to fix a smiley face topography where we have too little sagittal depth, you guessed it, you need to increase the sagittal depth. And the way we increase the sagittal depth is you can steepen those reverse or alignment curves. I mentioned the reverse curve is a good starting point for manipulating the sagittal depth of an ortho-K mold. So steepening the reverse curve, steepening the alignment curve, that can help recenter a smiley face topography. Then there's frowny face. If you got smiley face, you got to have a frowny face. And the reason is you see that red ring within the pupil area. It looks like a frown, and it's just the opposite of a smiley face. So it's riding low. There's inferior decentration in a frowny face topography. So what causes the exact opposite of a smiley face? We have too much sagittal depth. We're too far off the cornea. So the way we fix it is the exact opposite of a smiley face as well. We got to flatten those same curves. So to decrease the sagittal depth of an ortho-K mold, you flatten that reverse curve. Flattening the alignment curve will get you closer to the actual true corneal tissue, and that will actually help recenter the design. You can also change the overall diameter. Usually, if you measure the HBID appropriately, you shouldn't have to manipulate that too much. Reverse curve and alignment curve modifications are by far the most common when you have a frowny face design. On diameter selection, you want to go pretty big. So from HBID, 98% of HBID is probably where you want to start. I like to be around 0.3 to 0.4 millimeters less than HBID, and that'll pretty much be around 98%. So talk to the labs and whoever you work with, they'll have their own recommendations, but you're fitting pretty large on Ortho-K. You're close to a large majority of HBID. So as long as you select that properly at the get-go, for these complications, you're mostly manipulating the reverse curve and alignment curves. Then there's lateral decentration. You can see this on the topography. That red ring, which is that peripheral plus you're inducing from the reverse curve, it's not fully formed and it's shifted a little bit more to the right. So you can see that this is actual lateral decentration, not a fully formed ring, and it's not exactly centered within the pupil area. This is by far the toughest complication to deal with. And the reason is any one of the things can go wrong. You could have too much sagittal depth, you could have too little sagittal depth, the diameter is off. So this one, you really got to put your thinking hat on. There's a lot more investigation you got to go into when you have lateral decentration. I will say the majority of the time, it's probably a diameter issue. So if you have lateral decentration, think diameter first. Relook at your HBID, see if it was measured properly. When you measure off a topography, sometimes it can fool you a little bit. So look at what that corneal mold looks like at the slit lamp. And are you covering most of that corneal diameter? That's a good way to assess if you actually have a proper diameter selection. And then from there, if the diameter looks good, you really need to look at the slit lamp. So topography alone is not enough when you're doing Ortho-K troubleshooting. You need to combine what the fluorescein images look like in addition to your topography images. So look at how the lateral decentration looks on topography, then put the molds on the eye with fluorescein, and then see what that fit looks like. And if you're seeing a flat fitting design, then you got to steepen those alignment curves. If it's too steep, you may have to flatten. So you got to put RGP fitting relationships at the slit lamp in addition to what the topography looks like. Then there's central islands, and it's called a central island because that's what it looks like. Right in the center, you see this little area of steepening, that green little dot looks like a central island. And this is caused by too much sagittal depth, okay? It's very similar to a frowny face. So you can actually see a frowny face topography that has a central island as well. They sometimes go hand in hand. So we fix it just like a frowny face. You have too much sagittal depth, so you need to flatten that reverse curve to bring that design closer to the cornea and to the actual sagittal depth of the corneal tissue of the patient. So here's what it looks like. This is a patient of mine that developed a central island, and we just flattened the reverse curve by a diopter. 2 weeks later, you see that central island's pretty much gone. So just reducing that sagittal depth, getting the design closer to the cornea, clear that up right away, and it only took a couple of weeks to get that patient happy. Central islands are tricky when you do manifest refraction. They'll see poorly because you see that nice green dot right in their line of sight. Don't be surprised with central islands. Patients can even see worse than their baseline. Now, false central islands are a little bit different. They can look similar on topography. You'll still see this area of steepening, but a false central island is actually caused by mechanical disruption, okay? It's keratitis. So when your base curve or your reverse curve is too flat, you're too close to the cornea, you'll cause that epithelial disruption. And the topography will be confused because it'll actually see this roughing up of cells. It'll have a little steep layer centrally. Now, in a true central island, that little bump will be a much higher, okay? In a false central island, the bump will be small in your topography. And the easiest way to tell is stain the cornea and you'll see central keratitis. In a true central island, you won't see SPK because there's too much sagittal depth. You're too far off the cornea. In a false central island, your topography can confuse you, but stain the cornea and you'll see central keratitis, and the topography is being confused by that epithelial disruption. And it's important to distinguish between the two because they're caused by two different things and they're fixed by two different methods. In a true central island, remember, we have too much sagittal depth. So we need to reduce the sagittal depth to get closer to the cornea. In the false central island is the opposite. You already started off too close in fact that it's causing keratitis. You now need to increase the sagittal depth. So while a true central island is very similar to a frowny face, a false central island is similar more to a smiley face design. So in these cases, you want to actually steepen the reverse curve to increase the sagittal depth of design, lift that mold off the cornea, and make sure there's no epithelial disruption. So very important to distinguish between the two, a false central island and a true central island, because they're fixed completely different ways. And it's pretty easy to tell the difference. Just stain the cornea, and if you see keratitis, false central island, no keratitis, you can be pretty confident that it's a true central island. And then getting into toric designs. So I talked about this briefly. I really use the elevation maps to help decide whether I'm going toric or spherical. So first, let's talk about the two different types of astigmatism. There's apical and limbus to limbus. You can see that this doesn't extend to the peripheral cornea, an apical astigmatism. We can all agree that this astigmatism is different. It's extending far out in the periphery, okay? Now, in most cases, limbus to limbus will have more changes in elevation than apical, but just rely on your topography. It'll calculate it for you. Click the elevation map and it'll exactly tell you the elevation difference in relation to a best fit sphere at any chord you want. Again, I recommend 8 millimeters. That's typically where most Ortho-K alignment curves land. And then find out what that difference is. This is a Medmont. This is actually the original Medmont, the E300, and it shows you where you have this weighted average. So the flat meridian was 1065. I went to the steep meridian, it was 1126. Again, the topography can calculate this out for you. The difference was 60.9. Last I checked, 60 is greater than 25. So I would go into a toric design for this, okay? And that's a good rule of thumb. When you're above 25 microns, probably need to go into toric design. And most of my Ortho-K designs these days are likely toric. I use mostly custom-based software, so they're not only quadrant specific, but even more than that. But using most labs, you'll probably use a majority of toric designs. All right, so last but not least, I just want to give a shout out to a few great resources. GPLI has a lot of great webinars that are archived, not only on Ortho-K and myopia control, but also on just GPs and sclerals in general. And then, of course, AAOMC, by far the best organization I've ever been a part of. Since attending Vision by Design several years ago, it's completely changed my outlook of how I practice and just how I interact even with colleagues. The organization is fantastic, filled with doctors that are just so passionate about myopia control, passionate about teaching, passionate about making sure that the public is aware about orthokeratology and myopia control. So highly recommend checking out both GPLI and AAOMC. So I want to thank everybody for paying attention on a Sunday, and I'll open it up to questions.
Yeah, Anith, we have a few questions in the Q&A, so I'll rattle them off. What is your preferred way of measuring HVID?
So I do measure it off the topography. I actually like, and I have a Menmont Meridia Pro. I like to turn off the color map so I can actually see the iris details, and then I take my caliper tool and measure straight across.
Cool. How big should the treatment zone be? Is it in relation to pupil size?
It'll depend on the design. Most of them have something that's preset. If you use a custom design, you can change it. There's some studies that show if you reduce the treatment zone, basically the width of the base curve, you have a little bit more of a myopia control effect. They measured, I believe it was between a 6 millimeter optic zone versus a 5 millimeter optic zone. You tend to have a little bit better myopia control with the smaller optic zone. So there are studies that have shown better myopia control effect.
Awesome. What about axial length instrumentation? Is it something that that you utilize to show how effective you're doing with Ortho-K management?
I do. We use an IOL master to measure axial length, and there's a lot of great tools out there now. So we absolutely use axial length when we do our consults, and then track yearly as well.
Awesome. Someone wanted to know what anterior segment OCT instrument you use.
It's a Cirrus Zeiss, and with the anterior segment lens add-in feature. So there's a lot of different ones out there.
Cool. And last one is, someone said my topographer doesn't have a tangential map, but rather a power change map. Do you know how those two compare?
Yeah, if I knew the name, which topography was, I could probably help out. Usually it's like a shape factor map is something, or an instantaneous map. That's usually one that corresponds with the tangent.
Gotcha. Oh, and someone just asked also, what do your follow-up schedule, what's your follow-up schedule look like for Ortho-K?
So this is just mine personally, but I do a 1 day, I do a 2 week, and then if everything's looking good, I'll check again in a month. Make sure that everything's looking good and finalized. Check them here. A lot of our patients are referral based, so they'll continue their primary care with their referring doctor. So I'm just checking Ortho-K only.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks a lot. Great presentation.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, fantastic, Anith. That was some great information right there, and kind of just a Ortho-K 101, gives you everything you need to know. So which is great. And then we're going to have a little 10-minute talk on, we're going to shift gears from Ortho-K to soft contact lenses. But before we do that, a couple of people had questions, and we still have the Oculus deal going on. So the Cartograph 5M is still there. So just want to put that up. Julie wanted me to put that slide there real quick. All right, and we're going to go ahead and shift gears, and we're going to do a quick talk on peripheral defocus soft contact lenses. So our goal here today is to talk about all the ways of myopia control and management for the first couple hours, and then our third hour and our panel discussion will revolve around putting it in your practice, making it profitable, and just kind of implementing the whole practice management side of it. So I'm going to invite Dwight Barnes and Dr. Jonathan Skoner, Dr. Dwight Barnes and Jonathan Skoner on as well. And Anith is going to kind of just be leading the reins here. You're going to be asking some questions, and it's just going to be a discussion about 5 to 10 minutes on peripheral defocus soft contact lenses. So I'll let you guys take it from here.
Yeah, we had some talk, or we just went over Ortho-K. So let's talk about the other modality, peripheral defocus contacts. Dr. Barnes, Dr. Skoner, thanks for doing this with us. Not sure if I can see you guys. You guys have your videos on? Oh, I might need to stop sharing, huh? Right, I did.
My video.
There you go. Great.
There we go.
Yeah, I can see you guys.
Great.
I see Dwight. Yep.
Wonderful. Dr. Barnes, I'll start with you, and then Jonathan, you can follow up after. But I know you guys have some things you want to talk about how multifocal or peripheral defocus contact lenses work. If you want to kind of lean into that, and then I'll follow up with some questions. Does that sound good?
Sure. Absolutely.
Great.
That works. Well, I think it's great doing this right after Anith's lecture, because he went into so much detail, Anith, on your on how the Ortho-K lens works for myopia control. And the thing that makes it a little easy when you start talking about a peripheral, a dual focus soft contact lens, is it's really the same principle, right? We're not reshaping a cornea. We've got a soft lens that's going to drape over the cornea like any other soft lens. It's trying to accomplish basically the same thing in terms of myopia management, but it's doing it optically through the lens in terms of by reshaping the cornea. So the end result is you've got this lens that's got zones designed for the distance vision, and some that are undercorrecting there, and creating that same peripheral defocus on the retina that you get from a well-fit orthokeratology lens. So it's two different ways to accomplish the same thing. And when I have a conversation with a parent, And they're asking about the various options they have available. A lot of times that's the way I'll describe it. I'll say, well, you know, the way it limits myopia progression is actually the same for both of them. It's just one of them is wearing a contact lens or a mold, as we call it in our office, overnight and not wearing any type of corrective lenses during the day. And the other is wearing a soft lens during the day and of course not wearing a lens at night. So sometimes it'll boil down to what the family that we're talking to is more comfortable with, or, you know, what's going to fit their lifestyle a little bit better. But again, that mechanism is really about the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if I could add into that just a little bit, I think one of the really great thing about considering multifocal soft lenses is that they have a really low barrier to entry. So I think they're a really nice segue for people who are looking to, practitioners who are looking to get into myopia control, but maybe don't have access to a corneal topographer, which, like Anith said, is highly recommended and is becoming the standard of care. It's really nice to still measure axial length. However, if you just want to start getting into myopia control, it's a great way to do it and feel confident knowing that the lenses are pre-designed with the peripheral myopic defocus for you. Because of the less customizability, it kind of makes it a really good starting point for someone.
Yeah, that's great. I definitely agree with the barrier entry. A lot of parents are familiar with, okay, kids wearing contact lenses, and now you have options where they can actually have myopia control effect as well. And do you guys use typically MySight? I know that's the one that a lot of us are familiar with, has the FDA approval. Do you like going straight into that design, or are you guys using other designs? Tell me a little bit about that. Dwight, we can start with you.
Sure. You know, there's a few options out there. If there are a patient who has very little astigmatism, I will use MySight or Natural View. Natural View multifocal does a good job with that too. If both of them are an option, so we're talking a patient, you know, less than about a -7. If both of them are an option, I do tend to use MySight more. I feel like a lot of their patient and parent education materials are really helpful. And, you know, having the FDA approval, as we all know, because myopia control has typically kind of lived in that off-label territory, having FDA approval is not essential, but it's a nice thing. And for parents, it can be a really nice thing. So the Brilliant Futures program, you know, they have some information for parents, which is great. So all things being equal, I use that more than anything else. It's great having the Natural View as an option because they do work quite well. And they go really high, they go up like a 12. So you're not likely to run into kids that are too myopic to get started with that. And then, you know, really where you have to get a little bit more creative is if you do have that patient that would much prefer to do a soft lens as opposed to Ortho-K, and they do have some moderate cylinder that you're going to have to deal with.
What about you, Jonathan? Are you using kind of the same, leading more towards MySight when you can, or are you using other modalities?
I am. I mean, it's being a well-experienced orthokeratology fitter, I lean on that pretty heavily. But MySight, when I'm thinking a soft contact lens modality, MySight is usually my first go-to. The FDA approval really transformed the way that I think about soft contact lenses for myopia control, and I think it lends a lot of confidence to patients and parents knowing that this is no longer considered off-label for myopia control. So that's a big point for me and for them, and it saves me a lot of discussion points as a chair time actually as well.
Yeah, the FDA approval was big. I mean, I'll have patients coming in just asking about MySight because of that FDA approval. So it's been great of getting leads into the office. Now, a lot of those will come in and they're a -8, -2 still. So when you have patients that have that residual astigmatism, what are you typically doing with soft contact lenses? Are you having just glasses on top of it? Are you using a different type of modality? Tell me a little bit about that. Jonathan, we can start with you.
Yeah, so sometimes if, you know, obviously we all try to mask as much cylinder as possible. And I found that typically masking up to 1 1/4 diopters, I can be pretty successful without interfering too much with quality of life for the patient's vision perspective. But ultimately glasses over top of the contacts when needed, the additional, like for driving, if the patient's old enough to drive, or in school-age children, you know, if they need to see the board for school, it's nice to have glasses with the additional sil correction. When I start getting into higher sil degrees and the patient is not you know, comfortable with wearing glasses over top of the contacts because they feel like it defeats the purpose, at that point I will start to consider maybe some alternative contact lenses if the patients push me in that direction that would allow me to do something like a toric soft multifocal center distance design. that would hopefully achieve all the patient wants and our goal of myopia control, albeit with a non-FDA approved option, but off-label.
Got it. And Dwight, are you using glasses on top of them? Are you using other modalities or considered off-label hybrid lenses or RGPs that are multifocal lenses for these cases?
It's like so much of what we do, it tends to be really individualized. I have no problem doing glasses over the contacts if there's no objection from the patient and the parents, especially if it's not a tremendous amount of astigmatism and maybe they can do 90% of what they want to do without any glasses, but maybe, for certain activities or maybe in the classroom, they put them on. But in general, just in the thought of trying to be as patient friendly as possible, it's nice if we can eliminate that dependence as much as possible. Like Jonathan, we do more Ortho-K than we do soft lenses. So if they're open to that, a lot of times that's where we'll go. If they're not, I absolutely have used some of the soft multifocals, and again, it's off-label, but it's very effective. Ortho-K for myopia control is off-label too, technically. It's FDA approved for correction of myopia, but for myopia control or myopia management is off-label. But I won't hesitate to use some of the commercially available soft contact lenses that do combine astigmatism correction with a multifocal. I don't tend to do the hybrid lenses for that, but I think that's a great option for it. Something like a synergized Duet multifocal, you certainly can, correct that astigmatism due to the rigid center, and that would be an option for those patients as well.
Got it. Yeah, I know there's some docs that utilize those other modalities. It'd be interesting to see more research go into those areas. And I'm kind of with you. When there's a lot of astigmatism, might just push them that Ortho-K route.
Yeah.
Chris, I know we got some questions coming in. If you want to bring up some of those.
Yeah, let's see. Well, I think most of them are actually being answered live, like questions about astigmatism. So we, and you guys went into that.
Just shows the genius of me hosting, right? I'm already getting those questions out the way.
You're way ahead of the game, man. Yeah. Here is a question by an audience member. So is myopia management covered by medical insurance since my site is FDA approved?
Jonathan? What's your answer?
As of right now, I'm not aware of any medical coverage. Typically, medical insurances are washing their hands of myopia, although we all, as practitioners, know it to be a medical condition because of the ocular sequela that can be caused from axial elongation. Medical insurances just simply aren't recognizing it. So ultimately, a lot of myopia management care tends to be out of pocket, or a lot of practitioners I talk to put together individualized pricing plans and packages for their patients to, coherently manage them and account for all the chair time and follow-ups. Dwight, how about you? Do you know any different?
Yeah, I am not aware of any medical insurances that cover it. And, to Jonathan's point, the medical insurances aren't really interested at this point, it seems, getting involved. And, from my perspective as a clinician, I'm not incredibly interested in them getting involved either. I've found that, most of the parents that we deal with, if we make it clear the reasons for myopia management and they see the value of it, they will pay a higher fee for something that requires a little bit more care and time in the office and maybe a more expensive product. So I'm not holding my breath for them getting involved. I'm okay with that being kind of outside the realm of managed care altogether. So I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. But no, I'm not aware of medical insurances that are trying to get involved and cover that.
I got
ODsonFinance after all, right? We want to make some money, so we don't want medical insurance covering this.
Caroline had a great comment.
Quick question for you guys. Are you when you're saying, like, do I use different terminology? I don't know if you do too, but dual focus versus multifocal, as you're showing a differentiation versus what they can get online as themselves being maybe presbyopic, right? Do you guys feel the same way in that sentiment?
I think it's a good point. It's nice to differentiate the two, because I often find that even talking to, myopia management practitioners, they get a little confused if you say multifocal for a moment. But ultimately, I tend to steer more towards multifocal because I feel like it's more accurate clinically due to the amount of peripheral defocus that varies between the lenses. And dual focus, for me, always, I sometimes feel like it's too simplified. Because we know we're doing more peripheral defocus than just one peripheral defocus point. But I don't know, Dwight, what are your thoughts on that?
So I tend to use neither term. I tend to just call it a myopia control soft lens, you know, and that kind of just opens it up to I'm always so careful about not accidentally misleading my patients or their parents, right? And there's some things we can do that we would certainly never do that on purpose, but it's easy to accidentally do that. And so I want to make sure that they walk out of that consultation understanding that soft contact lenses don't slow progression of myopia, but this one does, right? You know, and it's because it's designed differently, and which is also why it's more expensive lens and why it's more expensive, the management of it, our program fees, right? And I think that's just a nice way to set that apart. So that's the word I use, and I don't tend to get a lot of confusion or anything like that from parents when I just call it a myopia control soft lens.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dwight and Jonathan. We got to keep moving in our program so we don't get
Sure.
too far behind, but that was a fantastic discussion there. So appreciate
Thank you
y'all.
guys.
Absolutely.
And before y'all jump off, we got to talk about Vision by Design again. So I'm going to put the QR code here. Once again, you're going to be able to hear from all of these people. They're going to be given a variety of lectures. It's just a full week of myopia management, just learning everything about it. So Dwight, Jonathan, and Anith, if you can just go over real quickly, what's one thing that these individuals can take away from Vision by Design, if you just want to like put out one sentence, kind of a promo for
Sure. The quick thing I would say is it's the best education, in my opinion, in myopia management that you will find anywhere. And I never miss that meeting, but that's only half of it, right? You know, the other part of it is because it's focused on myopia management and not general optometry, you're there with people who feel as passionate as you do. You know, most of us who are doing a lot of this really feel passionate about it. We enjoy networking with others and talking with others. And, you know, you get these pearls and tips from people, whether they've been practicing the same length of time as you, longer than you, or shorter than you. I mean, you can learn something from everybody's experience. And when you've got a whole, you know, a hotel, a whole conference center full of people whose passion matches that, I find that's just such a really powerful thing. And I get revved up and energized every time I go.
Yeah,
I would
I'll say it is super inspiring, and I feel like the academy meeting is so it's so focused. When you leave there, you don't always feel like, for maybe the new fitters, you don't always feel like you're dabbling anymore. You feel confident knowing that you're making changes to a patient's eye, and you're not going to be putting them at risk because you left with the nibbles of knowledge that we're teaching you at this academy meeting. You're gonna leave it feeling empowered and hopefully more on the trend of the expert and the experienced fitter. I feel like that's really important in orthokeratology because there's so much experience that helps.
Absolutely. By far the best education out of any conference. And a lot of that happens outside of the classroom. Just interacting with all the doctors, the amount of information you get, it will change you when you get back to practice. It'll make you a better doctor. Like you mentioned, you'll get a lot more expertise, a lot more confidence. And with that, because it's ODsonFinance, you'll generate more revenue, right? So it'll impact your entire practice and change the way that you think about myopia control and give you the confidence that you can do it. So definitely the conference that I never want to miss.
Awesome. Thank you all. So we're going to go ahead and jump ahead. We've got a quick raffle coming up, and then we're going to hear from a couple sponsors. And then afterwards, Dwight's going to come back on and give us our second hour of CE. So let me pull up our randomizer here real quick to see who won this raffle. It's for a $100 Amazon gift card. So not only do you get to learn about myopia management, you also get to win money. I mean, what's better than that? And our lucky winner is Ruth Marquez. Ruth Marquez, if you're in the audience, you want $100 for Amazon, email us, admin@ODsonFinance.com. So congratulations. All right, and as Russell here, we are going to talk a little bit about DGH, one of our next sponsors here. The DGH is fantastic. I actually just got the unit 3 days ago, and Julie got it, I think, 5 days ago, and I've been able to try it out on 5 individuals. It's an A scan. It measures axial length. So Russell, if you want to take over and talk a little bit about DGH, and once again, we're on a little intermission here, so everyone feel free to just relax and take this in.
Okay, let me get started here. Can everyone hear me?
You're good?
Okay, here we go. All right, my name is Russell Schlage with DGH Technology. I am the territory manager of the Eastern United States, and Rafael Ramirez, who is on standby, is our West Coast territory manager. So I want to talk briefly about obtaining axial length measurements with the DGH SCAM8 A-scan. And I know there's a lot of talk about ultrasound not being accurate, not being reliable. And I want to put some of that to bed with my presentation today. So our unit is a portable USB A-scan. And as you can see in the picture here, I'm holding it in my hand, so it is quite portable. And it does plug into your Windows PC via USB.
Hey, Russell, you need to share your screen real quick.
Okay. I don't. Is it sharing now?
It is sharing. There we go. Yep, you're good.
Okay, let me go here, here. Let me do my. Okay, so it's portable, USB to your Windows computer. The software comes on a thumb drive, then you can install it on as many computers as you need to, no extra charge. We do have some exclusive features. When I was talking about the ultrasound getting a bad rap from a lot of people, a few things that we have that's unique to our system that makes the unit more accurate and more repeatable is our exclusive alignment and corneal compression algorithms. And that's what's most important, is the corneal compression algorithm. Because contact A-scan, if you are pressing too hard on the eye, you will shorten the measurement. And we have designed a feature that we can minimize or almost completely eliminate that error. It has a unique measurement ranking system. We have an axial length progression report, so something that you can share with the parents. And these reports can be exported as PDF, so you can put them into your electronic health record. This is an actual live scan being performed on Raffle. So you see in this example, it took about 3 seconds to obtain the measurement. This is another view. And then this is what the screen looks like after you've obtained measurements. And down here is just the most important feature that we have. This is the corneal compression sensor that is adjustable. And if this control is optimized, this is what enables the unit to be more repeatable and more accurate than other contact A scans. To give you an example of repeatability, these are 4 measurements that were conducted on my eye. These were done over a 1-hour period. And the measurements were, I know they're small, but we're talking 23.58 millimeters, 23.58 millimeters, 23.55 millimeters, and 23.61 millimeters. So the difference between the highest measurement and the lowest measurement in that 1 hour was 0.06 millimeters. This is within the repeatability that the optical devices have and what's been published about the optical devices. So again, as long as our unit's been optimized and you have a light touch on the cornea, you can expect repeatability equal to the optical devices. Now, this is an example of our progression report. Now, this is assuming that the patient was measured twice a year over multiple years. So this is the graph that you would point out to the parents. Obviously, you wouldn't have, a 20-year graph, but this would indicate, let's say here, if you had a big jump from one visit to the next, something you can easily point out to the parents and explain to them about the axial length growth. We do have a special for the ODsonFinance price. The list price of the unit is $39.95 plus shipping plus tax in certain states, and the ODsonFinance special price is $32.95. This also comes with a 3-year warranty and free shipping. So to sum it all up, the device is accurate. It is repeatable if used properly. It's easy to use. It's portable. Obviously, it's affordable, and it is EHR compatible. That's pretty much it. I want to thank everyone for attending. I want to thank Dat and Aaron for inviting us to participate today. I know it's a Sunday, and there's 750 people logged in. That's fantastic. Thanks to everybody who is joining us this morning.
Fantastic. Well, Russell, thank you again. Once again, Julie and I just got it at DGH. It's been fantastic overall. You can scan that QR code right there. And of course, we do have the ODs on finance deal, so take advantage of that. $700 off. I mean, who can go wrong there? And then let's jump over to our last sponsor, last but definitely not least, Brianna Rue with Dr. Contact Lens. And Dr. Contact Lens is a fantastic platform for ordering contacts. Brianna, if you want to take over.
Sounds good. Let me get in my presenter mode here. Yeah, and while I get this set up, I've had the DGH myself for 5 years. So it is repeatable. It's easy to get. It tells me what treatment I'm going to actually put in the patient into. So I just got it on my 4-year-old son. So it is easy. So here, can you guys see my screen?
You're good.
Aaron?
You're good.
Good. Okay. So I am excited to be here once again, as I gave a presentation to this group about 6 days after I had this little guy, Brennan. He's now 8 months old, and he could probably tell you more about Dr. Contact Lens than I could at this point. So again, Dat and Aaron, this group is truly forward thinking, and we're here to all make our practices better. So I'm excited to share 2 of my optometric passions on this Sunday. Myopia control has been a true game changer for myself, both professionally and for helping me get back to my why of why I became an optometrist. And my second area of our profession that I'm passionate about is the contact lens side of our practices and businesses, which brings me to Dr. Contact Lens. So you may or may not have heard of Dr. Contact Lens, but speaking of game changer, here's a quote from one of our Dr. Contact Lens offices. Dr. Wayne Gilmore says it's been an absolute game changer for his practice. He's got less phone time of patients calling back to order, less patients picking up their lenses, a far less employee time spent on receiving and unpacking boxes, and he's overall kept more contact lens revenue and patient revenue in his practice. As we have a lot of noise in our profession, I'm a true believer that we as optometrists can and will become the disruptors, but we got to put ourselves in the ring. So what is Dr. Contact Lens? Dr. Contact Lens, it's a marketing and contact lens ordering platform, giving doctors the necessary tools to recapture lost contact lens revenue and help you guys build meaningful relationships with your patients, which we all do a great job of. This technology enables you to once again elevate your patient experience. We've got 3 uniques. We help you capture walking scripts by sending digital copies of patients their prescription, allowing them to have an experience like no one else but you can offer. It allows your patients to order from you 24/7, use their rebates and their vision plans, and have access to their contact lens prescription whenever they need it. Our unique number 2 is we help you increase your reorder rate by sending patients automatic reorder reminders when they're due to order. So you're the one reminding your patients, not someone else, and we won't name any names. And unique number 3 is we help you stay in control of your contact lens practice by helping your staff easily sell to your patients, putting you and your staff on the offense versus the defense. I am a sponsor here, so again, there's always an ask, right? We're asking you to scan this QR code to book your free 15-minute practice assessment with one of our practice consultants. By completing your practice assessment by July 31st, you're going to be entered to win a $300 Amazon gift card. Why book this assessment? We want you to get a clear picture of what's going on in your practice because that's what Dr. Contact Lens is all about. We do have a special ODsonFinance offer for you as well, and I'll get that over to Dat and Aaron and Julie. So why $300? Why are we giving you $300 as a giveaway? Remember, every time you hand a patient a copy of their prescription, which we legally have to do, you're handing them $300 on average to spend in somebody else's store. So while you're scanning this QR code, I've got one challenge for you on Monday. Ask your contact lens technicians to show you how they're placing and processing contact lens orders, and challenge yourself to think from the staff and patient perspective if that's the experience you would want to have. So again, thank you again to the sponsors, the speakers, the ODsonFinance team for making these webinars happen. Hope to see a bunch of you at Vision Expo West, and I'm excited for the next presentation. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Brianna, and thank you, Dr. Contact Lens. And once again, feel free to scan that QR code there and schedule that consult with them. I think it'll be a game changer for your practice. All right, so I hope everyone had a chance to kind of relax, stretch, use the bathroom, because for the next 2.5 hours, we're just going to be going straight through. We're going to have 2 hours of CE and then a panel discussion with every single speaker that's been on this program. So it's going to be great. So second hour of COPE approved CE is starting now. And who's it going to be? Well, it's going to be Dr. Dwight Barnes. He's going to be talking about low-dose atropine for the treatment of myopia. Let me give him a quick introduction before he jumps on. Dr. Dwight Barnes is originally from Wilson, North Carolina. He received his undergraduate degree from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He then attended Southern College of Optometry in Memphis, Tennessee. Same school as me, go SCO, where he graduated magna cum laude in 2002. While in optometry school, he participated in a medical mission trip to Costa Rica, where he provided eye exams and glasses to underserved populations. Dr. Barnes completed a residency in primary care optometry and ocular disease at the Department of Veteran Affairs in Boston, Massachusetts. In addition to routine vision care, Dr. Barnes has a passion for myopia control and orthokeratology. He is certified in ortho-K treatment using several different products. Dr. Barnes has been awarded a fellowship in the International Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. This is the highest level of certification for experts in myopia control. He is currently the only fellow of the Academy in the Triangle and one of only 124 in the world. So Dr. Barnes, I'll let you take it over.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Here we go. And we'll get that in presentation mode. All right, everybody hear me okay?
You're good.
All right, wonderful. We'll go ahead and get started. Well, first of all, yeah, we're going to talk about atropine here, specifically low-dose atropine for the treatment of myopia, for the treatment of myopia progression. And just starting off, I wanted to give a quick shout out and thanks to the sponsors, you know, for allowing us to provide the CE and make it free of charge for everybody attending. Thanks for ODsonFinance for putting this together. And we'll go ahead and get rolling and learn a little bit about atropine. So quick disclosures, I do not have anything to disclose in terms of relevant financial relationships. The content of this talk is going to be free of any commercial bias or anything like that. A few points on low-dose atropine. So we're going to hit on some of these in more detail as we go through, but kind of the lowdown, the key points there is atropine is really effective for myopia management. I find that you know, there's a lot more talk about the orthokeratology as a treatment and also soft contact lenses for myopia management. And those are great options there, but atropine is a wonderful tool to have in your arsenal there. And there's a few reasons why I think that. You know, when Jonathan and I were talking a bit about the soft contact lenses for managing myopia progression, one of the points that was made, and it's a really good point, is that it's very easy entry in terms of you don't need a lot of equipment. You don't even have to have a topographer. You can go ahead and just learn about the lenses and start fitting them. And I look at atropine the same way. It's relatively easy to implement. You don't need to have a whole lot of equipment. You don't need to have a ton of training. And it's a great way to get started in myopia management. And also, if you're already providing Ortho-K, or if you're fitting the soft multifocal lenses for myopia control, or if you're doing both, it's a great way to have something to add to that arsenal of treatments there. We sometimes get patients who are apprehensive. They just don't like the idea of any kind of lens of any sort in their eye. And usually they're going to be okay with the thought of an eye drop, though. And a lot of times, if there's parents who are apprehensive about that, they're often good with the idea of an eye drop. So, you know, if you have a patient like that, they can get started on atropine. They can use it for long-term management throughout the period of time that they need that management, or they can use it for a couple of years. And if they come back and decide that they are comfortable with a contact lens and maybe they want to get rid of the glasses and have some freedom from that, you can switch them over into an Ortho-K or something like that. So there's a few different ways you can use it there. Also, like the fact that I truly think that anything you need to know about getting started with atropine, if you're not already doing that, is you can learn it in one lecture. And that's going to be my goal here, is really just provide all the information that you might need in terms of using this in your clinic, so you can leave this and go back into your clinics on Monday, go ahead and just get started with it if you're interested in doing so. Ortho-K takes a little bit longer to get comfortable with it. So, you know, atropine, really, you can just get it all in one. There's two different parts to this. The first part's going to be the scientific stuff. I think it's helpful to have that background to kind of understand how atropine works for myopia management, why it works, the studies that we use to determine the appropriate concentrations to use, and things like that. It's important information, but the science of it can be a little bit dry. So we'll try to, you know, get through that relatively quickly. And then we'll get into the practical part, you know, how to manage them in your clinic, what dosage to potentially start them with, how to track and see if it's working effectively, or if you need to change your treatment plan. And the things you need to do if you're not already offering it to get started offering it in your clinics there. So we'll go ahead and jump into the science part of it here. That means they're not because atropine only works 60% of the time. It works really well, and we'll get into that, of course, as we get into the studies. It's there just because I like the meme and I like Anchorman. So nice little segue into the science of it there with some statistics and things like that. So the first thing to talk about is safety. So atropine is an anti-muscarinic. So it's inhibiting the muscarinic receptors there. And there are some side effects that you would expect from systemic use of atropine. And most of these don't matter really from what we're doing. We're using it topically, and we're using specifically low dose atropine, which is what we're talking about in this particular talk here. But I still think it's helpful just for background to kind of understand what sorts of systemic side effects you would expect from this type of medication. So there's some mnemonics there to help you remember that. You've probably seen these before: dry as a bone, hot as a hair, red as a beet, blind as a bat. And of course, that's related to the side effects that we're aware of. You get some mydriasis and you get some cycloplegia, and it's going to affect the vision of the patient some. And then mad as a hatter, like this guy here on the slide, altered mental state there. So of course, when we're using topical atropine, we don't expect any of those things, but that's the idea with the systemic atropine there. So we can kind of move on to the safety as it applies to the topical use of atropine for myopia management. Using it correctly, you really don't expect any issues at all. You know, they've found in some studies some side effects, systemic side effects, using 1% atropine. And of course, the title of this is low dose atropine. You can use 1% atropine, but we typically don't do that in our clinics because it's not nearly as patient friendly, when we can accomplish quite a bit for myopia management using a lower dosage that doesn't really have those side effects. So, you know, even if we were using substantially higher doses than what we typically use for myopia management, systemic issues would be really uncommon. But it does make sense to just kind of understand that if the child has some comorbidities, some systemic issues that could cause cardiac effects, that there could be some concern for it, and you may want to pay attention to that when you're prescribing that. And, you know, it's important to just take a good case history on any patient you're seeing. In terms of getting a systemic side effect from a low dose formulation of atropine, like the ones that we're going to discuss today, it'd be just about impossible using it topically, right? You know, the really dangerous dose of atropine for a young child would be about 10 milligrams. Well, you can't really get that topically. The eye doesn't hold that much fluid. And especially the eye of a child holds less than the eye of an adult, and you just can't really get that in there. But I think it is worth noting that if a child were to literally like ingest a bottle of atropine, they totally could get that. You know, that'd be basically like a 15 milliliter bottle of 0.01 atropine. And that's not common, obviously, but it's a nice way to kind of illustrate, sure, store medications in the appropriate way and store them out of the reach of children, just like we don't have any hesitation if we have young children giving them children's Tylenol when they need it. We don't give them the bottle and ask them to have as much as they'd like. So especially for young children, just storing that appropriately makes sense. When you're using it topically, the topical side effects of atropine are as you would expect, given its drug category, given that it really is a dilating drop. You're going to get some photophobia in patients due to mydriasis, and you're going to get some blur that's going to be due to the cycloplegia there. And how much of that you get is going to depend a bit on which dosage you're actually using. And it's also going to be very individual with the patient. I have patients that have really not a bother at all with any side effects. And then we do have some that have a few more side effects than what you would expect. And so you manage those. And we'll get into a couple of the different ways that you can minimize those and typically make it so those side effects are not a big problem for the patient. Mechanism of action, again, anti-muscarinic. It's blocking acetylcholine at the muscarinic receptors. The main part of this is not to get into the nitty-gritty of exactly how it works, and we don't have a perfect understanding of that anyway. But the main thing, it doesn't appear to be related to simply suppressing accommodation. You know, people talk about the effect of near-point work on progression of myopia, and it is one of those things that can be considered a bit more of a risk factor for it. But the mechanism of action for atropine is thought to involve biochemically blocking that signal that causes the axial elongation or the front to back increase in length of the eye via receptor signaling pathways. And so those muscarinic receptors either in the retina or in the choroid or potentially in both, and in working that way biochemically as opposed to just suppressing the accommodation there. So a lot of the information that we know about atropine and how it works and what dosages work in different ways came from two really specific studies. And you guys have probably heard of these, but I think it's worth covering them quickly. The first one is the ATOM study, and we'll cover that first. And then the second one is the LAMP study, which came a little bit later. So for the ATOM study, atropine for the treatment of myopia, the ATOM study looked at, initially, ATOM 1 looked at 1% atropine versus placebo. And not only did atropine 1% work, it worked really, really well. Over 2 years, it was a close to 100% control rate. So, a lot of side effects when you're talking that dosage, but it was no joke in terms of how it worked for myopia management. Now, it did rebound. And what we find is, as you go through the studies, there is a dose-dependent relationship to how well atropine works. And there's also a dose-dependent relationship in terms of whether you get a rebound effect when you discontinue it and how much of a rebound effect you get. And when we get into the actual prescribing of that, we'll cover that. But they got a rebound when they discontinued it. And because of that rebound effect, overall, when they took that into account, the efficacy was more like about 44%, which is nothing to sneeze at. That's okay. But it certainly is a far cry from the close to 100% management that they got during the 2 years that they were on that dosage. So given that, they did the ATOM 2 study, which is looking at some lower doses that would be expected to have lower side effects, and they certainly did have lower side effects, to see how well they work. And in the ATOM 2 study, when you compare the 0.5, the 0.1, and the 0.01, there were some differences in how well it worked for refractive outcomes over those different concentrations. But the differences were not as significant as maybe would be expected. And given that they weren't as different as you might expect, and given that the 0.01 had fewer side effects, the general thought was that 0.01 probably was the most effective dose and the best dose in order to use. And for a while there, that was really the most common dose that people used, was the 0.01, based on that ATOM study. Now, some of the studies since then have shown the 0.01% not to be as effective as we initially thought from the ATOM study, and that's kind of where that LAMP study comes in. So we move from the ATOM study to the LAMP study, and the LAMP study, low concentration atropine for myopia progression, is really where a lot of the useful clinical data we get comes from, because the 3 concentrations they looked at were the most common concentrations that you find used for low dose atropine for managing myopia. So they looked at it, and in this study, it was a little bit different outcomes from what they got in the ATOM study. They did absolutely show a dose-dependent change in how well they worked, with the higher doses working better. And you can see on the slide here, the axial length control for 0.05 was 51%. It was 29% for 0.025, and it was 12% for 0.01. And these differences most certainly look clinically significant, and they were clinically significant. So the higher doses work better. Interestingly enough, the ATOM and the LAMP both looked at 0.01 in the ATOM 2, and then in the LAMP study, they looked at 0.01, and they found a pretty big difference in how well that concentration works. In the LAMP study, 0.01 was significantly less effective. And based on that information, 0.5 was kind of looked at it going forward as really maybe about the best doses that you could use. It had a little bit of rebound upon stopping, which wasn't found to be terribly clinically significant. And it was well tolerated by the children in the study there. So given that efficacy, that kind of switched things around. And most of us started looking at using a higher dosage there to have a little bit more effect, since it was tolerated pretty well there. In terms of slowing down myopia progression, well, what's better than slowing down progression of myopia? That would be preventing it to begin with. So there's some thought that you could use atropine possibly for the prevention of myopia in a higher risk patient, somebody who was trending that direction. And the ATOM 3 study is looking at that. So they're looking at it with 0.01% atropine. And that's something that, as those results come out, could absolutely change the way we practice a little bit. And we'll talk about, pre-myopes and what they look like, and if treating them would be a good idea. But it's kind of neat to know that they're doing another study there to look at the possibility of maybe being on the prevention side, which is always better than being reactive there. So one of the neat things when you look at the ATOM and the LAMP studies is, why were the differences so significant in terms of how well 0.01 atropine works? It's the same concentration, and kind of the only thing that makes logical sense to me is that there are different ways to compound low-dose atropine. So it's the same dosage, or at least it's designed to be, but the product isn't always the same, and that's something you run into with compounded medications that you don't really run into with medication that you can send right down to your CVS or your Walgreens or wherever you do send prescriptions there. You can take 1% atropine and you can just dilute it down with saline or artificial tears to get to the appropriate concentration you're looking for. You can take atropine for injection and dilute that to make an ophthalmic preparation, or you can take a powdered atropine and you can use that to make a drop out of it. And the results from these, different pharmacies do it different ways, but the results may not come out to be 100% the same. And so there's also differences in whether they're preserved or not and which preservative they use. So that's just the point there is because of a lack of agreement, there are some things that are different in terms of how you produce that from different compounding pharmacies, and it can affect it. And as you can see in there, as you look at the results of the ATOM and the LAMP study, the ATOM found 0.01 to be significantly more effective than the LAMP study did. So in terms of with the results of the ATOM study and the LAMP study in mind, which strategy is going to work best for us? Should we start low, trying to avoid side effects as much as possible, and then maybe adjust to a higher dose if it's needed, or should we just go ahead and start at that higher, more effective dosage? It's recommended that we start at a higher dosage. Most of the time, the side effects are not that bad, and most of the time they can be managed pretty well by things like photochromic lenses. So starting at the higher dose is really the best treatment strategy, and I don't really advise starting with a 0.01 in most cases. Higher dose like a 0.02, a 0.025, or a 0.05, and I highlighted that 0.05 because in my opinion, for most patients, especially younger patients at a higher risk, 0.05 is a great starting strategy for that. So that takes care of the science part of it, and so we can kind of get more into the nitty gritty how we use it in our clinics here. So incorporating atropine into your practice, how to get started and prescribe this for your patients and manage them and change treatment strategies as needed. I would assume that that most people who are on this lecture are on here because they already provide myopia management or because they have a very strong interest in providing myopia management. But I still think it's helpful to quickly touch on why it matters. We've all seen the stats, it's increasing in prevalence. By 2050, we're going to have at least 50% of the world is going to be nearsighted if we keep going at the same rate. And there's a couple of different stats that I think are helpful with that too. Bullimore and Brennan found that if you just slow myopia progression by 1 diopter total, you're reducing the overall risk for myopic maculopathy by 40%. And that's a big deal, right? 40% is huge. Myopic maculopathy can absolutely cause quite a bit of a vision loss and reduce best corrected vision. And so if you're looking at it thinking, well, what's the big difference between a -3 and a -4? Well, there's the big difference. Or what's the big difference between a -6 and a -7? They're already both quite nearsighted. Yeah, that's a pretty big difference. And I like to keep that in mind when I'm seeing these patients. And then there's a chart that I threw in here on the left side of this slide from Tideman that found a really strong association. And I think this one's impressive, right? 26 millimeters is kind of like that line where you kind of draw that line in the sand and say, boy, I'd really love to keep that axial length below 26 millimeters. The risk of vision impairment causing best corrected vision of 20/40 or worse throughout their lifetime for less than 26 millimeters was only 3.8%. Well, that jumped up to 25% at 26 millimeters and all the way up to 90% at 30 millimeters. And certainly we do see some of these patients who get more highly nearsighted to get up around 30 millimeters. So we've typically used refractive error to identify risk, kind of using somewhat arbitrary cutoff of 6 diopters as signifying an increased risk. And maybe we should be using an axial length of 26 millimeters instead. You guys know most of these. There are some factors that contribute to the risk there. Parental history, absolutely. 1 myopic parent increases it, 2 increases it more. Ethnicity, there are certain populations that have a higher rate of myopia across their population there. More time spent outside decreases the risk. Now, we haven't really seen that as proven to slow progression when they're already myopic, but it most certainly helps with the risk. And more near work increases it. And then the other biggie is if they become myopic at a younger age, they're going to tend to progress faster and they have a lot more years before they tend to stabilize. So they're going to have a higher risk of running into a higher level of myopia there. I think it's helpful to cover the concept of a pre-myope, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Somebody who's not yet myopic, but someone who is trending that direction and is at a higher risk to be myopic. And I think in an atropine lecture, that's a really good topic to cover. So the International Myopia Institute defined it as -0.5 or more. I just say if they're in the minus direction at all, they're myopic. But a pre-myope is at a high risk. And so if we can identify those, which we'll go through a couple of ways we can, should we treat them and how should we treat them? And my thought is that there is a tremendous benefit to treating a pre-myope. It requires a little bit more parent education. You got to get them on board with know your child's not myopic and this is how they're trending. And some parents really latch onto that and have a lot of interest in trying to prevent that. And some don't, but I think that we may see myopia management going that direction a little bit more because it is possible to identify some of these patients. In terms of what would be the most appropriate dosage for a pre-myope, we don't know that yet, right? ADAM3 is studying 0.01%, but we really don't have the information to know that yet. But the point is, if you're going to have someone who's not yet myopic and you do want to try to reduce their chances of becoming myopic, atropine is kind of going to be your go-to tool for that, as opposed to, orthokeratology, they're not nearsighted yet. So atropine is going to be the way to go for that, to try to decrease that chance of becoming nearsighted. So if we want to identify patients who are going to be at a high risk, one of the easiest ways, and you don't require axial length measurement or anything like that you would have to add to your clinic potentially. The CLEAR study looked at identifying patients at high risk of myopia based on their level of manifest hyperopia at a given age. So they're not nearsighted yet, but if they're 6 years old and they're less than 0.75, that's going to increase their risk. And you can see the chart there. And I do like to kind of keep that chart in mind there. And if you're not currently, if you're measuring axial length, but you're not currently measuring it on all children, I think at least if they're falling into these categories, it would make sense to start tracking that axial length as well if you have that technology available for you. So, so this is powerful information because they found in this study that the manifest hyperopia at a given age was actually more predictive than the number of nearsighted parents or the amount of near work that they do or the time spent outside. So it's a really powerful indicator there. And there are actually a couple of ways that do require axial length, but it's worth touching on those too. If you're measuring axial length for all children, or at least children who are trending that direction, if you're seeing an axial length increase of 0.2 millimeters or more per year, that may very well indicate a patient who's at a much higher risk. And if you measure that axial length, you can also compare that to the corneal radius. And if you've got axial length, which you measure in millimeters, and you take that corneal radius and you look at it in millimeters as opposed to diopters, and you take that ratio, a ratio of 3.0 or more is also predictive. So it gives you a few different tools to use. I tend to lean more on the refractive data, but we do measure axial length and I track that. And if we're seeing that moving in the wrong direction quicker than it should be, we'll certainly take that into account as well. And maybe discuss treatment with some of these, or at least watch them more closely. If you're not going to treat them as a pre-myope, watch them more closely and more frequently potentially. The average axial length at which a child tends to become nearsighted on average is 24.1 millimeters in boys and 23.7 millimeters in girls. Girls do tend to have a little shorter axial length on average. So a few things that you can keep in mind. So starting treatment, as I mentioned before, 0.05% atropine appears to be a very safe and effective initial starting treatment. You could certainly look at a 0.025. I used to use 0.025 primarily, and over the last couple of years, I have been going to the 0.05 more. And I found the majority of the patients handle that really well, especially if they know exactly what to expect and you're having a good informed consent with that. If you combine a lot of the studies that they've done on various modes of myopia management, 0.05 is roughly equivalent to the efficacy of orthokeratology, and it's also pretty well in line with some of the soft dual focus lenses like we discussed with the previous talk with Jonathan. And also the DIMS or Halt spectacle appear to be similar to that. And I'm not going to delve into DIMS and Halt, number one, because it's an atropine lecture, and number two, because I'm in the US and we don't really have access to them yet. But when you look at those, they are pretty similar in terms of efficacy. And the directions are super simple. You prescribe it, you tell them to put in a drop when they go to bedtime, and once a day is all it takes there. I think the off-label discussion is worth talking about, and we touched on this briefly in that short talk on soft lenses. But off-label to me clinically matters very, very little. We use off-label all the time. I've seen some studies that indicate as many as 20% of the medications that we prescribe in the medical community as a whole, not just eye care, are off-label. You know, if you prescribe desifloxacin for a corneal ulcer, I think we'd all agree that that's a very effective treatment, but it's technically off-label. because its FDA approval is for a different indication. You just want to make sure that you're prepared for that conversation and having that conversation with parents, because you'd rather explain that to them instead of them coming back and they've already started treatment and they have questions and concerns about it. The way I explain it is Atropine 1% is FDA approved. It's FDA approved not for myopia management, but for mydriasis and cycloplegia. And because it's a strong drug and it has a lot of side effects compared to the, like a Pyramid or phenylephrine or tropicamide, we don't really use it as much for this because it's just going to last, forever in terms of the side effects with it. And when you have to compound that, the FDA doesn't really tend to approve these compounded medications. So they're all going to be off label. So not only is it off label, it's going to pretty much continue to be off label unless you get a company that decides to create a non-compounded low-dose atropine formulation and then go through that process to obtain FDA approval as effective for slowing myopia progression. And I think there are a couple of companies that are doing that, but they're not on the market yet. So we're going to still continue to have that off-label discussion. So in terms of managing side effects, photochromic lenses and bifocal lenses, who needs them there? My opinion, and doesn't really affect atropine at all. I think every child who wears glasses should have photochromic lenses. In my clinic, they all get prescribed photochromic. Now the parent, may decide not to get it, but we're going to be prescribing those photochromic lenses. UV protection, super important. I think we're all putting kids probably in polycarbonate or Trivex, and they do provide UV protection as well. But, I like the idea of building that habit of having sun lenses when you go outside. Build it as a young child, and then they'll probably be more likely to continue that in the form of photochromic lenses or sunglasses as an adult. And also, there's no point in making a child deal with photophobia, even if it's mild photophobia, when we can do something about it. So not only do all my atropine patients get photochromic lenses, but all of my children get photochromic lenses unless they just flat out refuse to get them. And we certainly explain to them why. It's for UV protection, it's for the patient's comfort there. In terms of bifocals, that's going to depend a little bit on the dosage there. If you're using a lower dosage, you probably don't need bifocals, but there's plenty of exceptions there too. I've had patients have way more near blur complaints at like a 0.025 than I would expect. And I've had patients with 0.05 have virtually no near complaints. So it is going to be individualized. And of course, if they have some pre-existing accommodative difficulties before you even get started, of course, you're going to be a little bit more concerned at any dose for them to have difficulties there. So I put photochromics on all of them, and then it depends on the child and it depends on the dosage of atropine if we use a bifocal or progressive addition lens. And of course, if you're not using one and they have symptoms, then get them in a progressive and try to reduce their symptoms there so that they can be successful with continuing to use the atropine every night. So I think this is one of the most important parts. I think there's a lot of information out there on monitoring, tracking progression. And I think it's some of the most important education out there because prescribing atropine is the easy part, right? You write the prescription, you send it to a compounding pharmacy, the parent picks it up and they start using it. The bigger part is how do you monitor them and how do you change, how do you know when to change treatment and how do you change that treatment? So we're going to spend a couple of slides on that. My opinion is the primary outcome for evaluating efficacy should be axial length, not refraction. I do realize that not everyone has a method for axial length, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. I don't think that should keep you from doing myopia management at all. But I think if you have access to that technology, axial length is an important piece of data that you can use. Some of the reasons being axial length is objective and refraction is subjective. The axial length technology that we have available to us has an incredible resolution, measures axial length down to 0.01 millimeters, which can equate to about a 0.03 diopters. And so that's going to be more sensitive than even your cycloplegic refraction. Some kids are incredibly accurate and good at doing a subjective refraction, and some kids are not. But having that piece of data really helps manage that. And it makes a lot of sense to parents when you explain it as well. In terms of the risk of pathology that could lead to vision loss, is also much more correlated with axial length than it is to refraction. When you're monitoring these patients, the frequency of follow-up should depend on how long they've been on atropine, if they just started or have they been on it for a while, and have you already achieved pretty good stability. And maybe some of the other risk factors like a younger patient may require a little bit more follow-up. So in my clinic, I generally measure their progression. As soon as I prescribe atropine, I usually measure them at every 3 months. And at those visits, I'm doing a refraction, an autorefraction, and getting an axial length. and tracking that over time to see how stable they are. And then if they're stable, we might move those out a little bit less frequent. You know, if they're showing really good stability one visit after another, we think we're at the right dosage for atropine and it's working well. After that, we may follow them every 4 to 6 months. And some of the things that would affect progression again. So there's things like becoming nearsighted at a younger age, having a faster history of progression, things like that. The way I explain axial length and how we use that to track progression and how we use that to guide our decisions, I explain that to parents as, you know, the child is getting older, and as the child gets older, they're going to get taller and their arms and legs are going to get longer and their shoe size is going to get bigger. The length of their eye from front to back, or what we call the axial length, is also going to increase. And this is for all children as they grow, whether they're nearsighted or whether they're farsighted or whether they're going to become nearsighted. It all increases over time. And the younger these children are, the faster their axial length is going to progress without becoming nearsighted, right? Even if they're farsighted and they're not going to become nearsighted, it's going to increase much faster at a younger age. So when we're looking at a goal, you know, what does successful treatment with atropine look like? We'd love to keep their axial elongation at around the age expected level for a non-nearsighted patient at their age or less. And there's a few different studies that have shown that. So the MySight study was showing that a change of 1 millimeter over time generally equates to about 2.4 diopters of myopia. And then there was also the Blink study, which found a little bit less progression, that 1 millimeter equated to about a 1.4 to 1.6 diopters change. There was a more recent study that was putting that at about 2.04. And since that came out, I've been using that more for 2 reasons. Number one, I think it's kind of right in between the MySight and the Blink studies. And then number two, 2.04 is really, really close to 2. And I like nice round numbers that I can remember easily. So I don't have to remember and do a whole lot of difficult math. If we just kind of say, you know, a millimeter is about 2 diopters. Sorry, not a millimeter, 0.1. 1 millimeter, sorry, 1 millimeter is 2 diopters, so a half a millimeter, 0.5 is going to be about 1 diopter. I think that's a nice way to kind of have it clear in my head and track it, and I don't have to remember too many things, which can get difficult. So in my clinic, the rule of thumb that I use is if they're under 10, we're looking at trying to keep it less than about 0.2 millimeters per year. And of course, if you're seeing them at 6 months, then you can look at, you know, 0.1 millimeter for 6 months makes sense. And as they get older, we expect that progression to slow down in terms of the increase in axial length. So we try to keep them at about 0.1 millimeters or less per year in older children. One other little neat note that you'll find using atropine to manage patients, there's this cool phenomenon called choroidal thickening. And what will happen is when you're managing myopia, and this isn't just atropine, you'll tend to get this thickening of the choroid for a period of time. And what that'll do is cause you to read actually slightly less on the axial length when you measure that. So you didn't actually reverse their myopia or reduce their number. But because of that, you will measure a smaller number than what you initially measured at baseline. And that's pretty cool because that usually indicates to me that we've hit an ideal dosage there and we're likely to have really good control of that myopia. So if we're getting them back at 3 months and we're seeing a decrease instead of an increase, you know, high fives all around, we should be in a really good shape. And of course, we're still going to track them over the course of that year and beyond, but that's a really good sign there. So that's all due to that choroidal thickening. In terms of adjusting treatment, it doesn't have to be incredibly complicated. If they are progressing beyond what you think they should be with treatment and you think you're not having enough control, increase the dosage. If you're at a 0.025, look at a 0.05 and talk to them about the side effects and consider, you know, a bifocal if they're not already wearing it. If they're at a 0.05, a lot of compounding pharmacies can most certainly compound a higher dose than that. And there's nothing saying you can't go higher than that. I just don't typically start patients at a higher than a 0.05. You can also look to combine treatment. If they're open to the idea of a contact lens, you can try to combine atropine with Ortho-K or peripheral soft focus lens, or you could just try to switch and see if maybe for that patient, you will get better control for an Ortho-K. But you have a few options there. And the key is just to track them frequently enough so that you're able to detect that change, determine that it's unacceptable and that maybe you could do better, and consider that increase in dosage or combining it with other treatment. Stopping treatment or decreasing, you know, if you have unacceptable side effects and despite using bifocal potentially or a photochromic lens, you just can't control them, you'd have to consider a decrease in dosage or switching to another method of myopia management like Ortho-K or a soft dual focus lens there. So that's kind of common sense, but the key is not worrying too much about what to do, because I think that part's very intuitive. It's just seeing them frequently enough and understanding what does show progression and what findings on the axial length would show stability there. So discontinuing treatment. How long should you continue to treat the patient? My take on that is you should treat them as long as they are young enough that they're likely to continue to become nearsighted. There's been some doctors that advocate for treating for a couple of years and then stopping for a bit and restarting. And I think that really goes from that's how they did things in the initial ATOM study there. But in my opinion, you know, if they're young, they're likely to continue to become nearsighted, and I would rather them not have progression for a period of time of 6 months or a year while we stop treatment to then restart it. So I want to treat them. And so if we started treatment when they were 6 and they're now 10, I still want to keep treating them because 10-year-olds get much more nearsighted over time. I think that, you know, anything else would be kind of an arbitrary way to do it. And if our goal is to control their progression, let's control it as long as they're likely to continue to get nearsighted. In terms of tapering, you can find some different information on that. The LAMP 3-year study, they showed some rebound effect with 0.05. It wasn't a tremendous amount, but they did show some. And they didn't really show any significant rebound effect with 0.025. In my clinic, I definitely taper 0.05. And in my clinic, I actually tend to taper 0.025 as well. My thought being, even if it's fairly clinically insignificant, tapering's pretty easy. And usually the parents aren't in so big of a hurry to get off the treatment when it's becoming time to do so that they need to stop immediately. So I usually do actually taper that down a little bit. If they were on a 0.01% atropine, I probably wouldn't bother with tapering there. So the tapering can look a couple of different ways. You can just simply take that higher dosage and taper it down to the next lower dose. So from a 0.05% to a 0.025% for a year. And then maybe taper it down further than that, or you could have them start using it every other day. But that's the idea there, is even though these lower dosages don't show the same rebound effect that the 1% did or anywhere close to that, if we can in some small way enhance the total amount of control we get, that's a nice idea to do for the patients there. So I do tend to taper. Combination treatment. So there's been some studies that show better efficacy when you're combining atropine with orthokeratology. The studies that I've seen are looking at 0.01%. It may very well be that we're going to see some studies that show a lot of combined benefit when you're using a higher dose of atropine as well. There was a study that did not show this benefit, by the way, with soft contact lenses, but given that their mechanism of action for myopia management is the same between orthokeratology and soft lenses, that peripheral defocus, it would make sense to me that it should work with either one of them, and I have combined atropine with either one on patients. When I need a little bit more control, when I don't think I'm getting enough control on atropine, and maybe I'd rather combine with an orthokeratology, for example, instead of increasing the dosage, that's absolutely an option for you there. So I tend to use combined treatment more than I used to. I don't really hesitate to reach for that. And it could very well be, as they do more studies on this, that could become more of kind of a gold standard. If it's going to work better, why not consider using that, at least for a higher risk patient, you know, who's becoming nearsighted at an earlier age, where you think it might be a little bit more difficult to control that progression. So that that's an option that's out there as well. So getting started. Fortunately, as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk here, there's not a whole lot that's involved in getting started. It's pretty easy to, within just a couple of days, put together everything you need to implement this in your practice. So you really need 4 things. You need an informed consent. You need to set your fees for your treatment program, and you need to find a compounding pharmacy that you plan on sending your prescriptions to. And then you need to figure out your follow-up schedule that you're going to plan on following for most patients. So we're going to talk about each of these in just a little bit more detail here. As far as informed consent, you should do an informed consent for atropine just like you should do an informed consent for orthokeratology or for other treatments that are optional and could have some side effects. The most important thing to put in there is the side effects, because we already know them and we know that they're fairly common, and there's no point in taking a chance on a parent being confused or surprised because they didn't remember you saying that in the exam room. So when you put together the informed consent, and it doesn't have to be incredibly long, mine's not, make sure that they know that atropine can cause near blur, that it can cause light sensitivity, and that there are some things we can do to manage that, being the photochromic lenses and potentially a bifocal, so they know that if they do get these effects, it shouldn't necessarily keep them from being able to continue atropine and be successful with it. I do think it's helpful to have the off-label status on there as well. Again, clinically for me, that is non-contributory. I'm happy to use off-label treatments, but parents don't understand off-label necessarily. So I think it's helpful to have an explanation in there of what that means. So you get ahead of that. So if they do have a concern with that, they can voice that before they've paid the money for your program and started treatment there. I make it very, very clear, both verbally and in my informed consent, that the goal is to slow progression of myopia. And we certainly cannot reverse myopia. I tell parents, your child he will never be less nearsighted than he or she is right now. It's just going to get worse, or in a best case scenario, would stay the same. And in most cases, we can't even stop progression. We can slow it down quite a bit, but most patients are still going to get more nearsighted, even with myopia management treatment like Ortho-K or Atropine or a dual focus soft contact lens, or potentially even with a combination. So the last thing I want is for us to have a wonderful outcome where we treat a kid for 5 years and they got worse by only a half diopter, and a parent's disappointed in that. That would be a wonderful outcome. Obviously, get this signed before you start treatment. And the main thing to remember when you make an informed consent is that parents don't know what they don't know. So if you think they should know it, put it in the informed consent. A good example is I have plenty of parents who mistakenly believe that atropine will improve the child's vision or decrease their dependence on glasses. Well, we know it doesn't do that. They're still going to depend on their glasses to see better. It's just for slowing the myopia progression. So make sure you're making that clear to the parents so they're not disappointed. They may have a friend who has a child who's doing Ortho-K and they equate them and put them in the same bucket because they're both myopia management. So make sure you tell them that. Setting your fees, we're not going to get into specific fees, of course, with it being a CE lecture there, but my approach is to have a program fee. Instead of charging per visit, we charge a yearly fee. It's more for the first year because we tend to see them less frequently. And hopefully they're really stable after the first year. And that program fee includes all the visits, including the initial consultation. It includes the prescription for the atropine and any changes we have to make. And if we do have to see them more frequently, those visits are still included, provided they're related to the atropine use. And in terms of basing your fees, it's like you would anything else in your clinic. You know about how many number of visits you expect to have in each year of treatment. You know what your chair cost is, or if you don't, you can calculate that. So that's easy to figure out what your cost clinically is going to be. And then your knowledge and experience, which is going to increase as you treat more of these patients, and the technology. If you're bringing in something expensive like an optical biometer, reflect that you're gathering data on this patient using a more advanced technology, and you can charge a little bit more for that. One more note on fees. I actually use a form that also outlines the fees and has the patient's parent sign saying that they acknowledge what the fees are. And I have them sign that at the same time they do their informed consent, and that just reduces the likelihood of any arguments over what the fee should be. At that point, they've signed it and they've agreed at what the fees are going to be, so there shouldn't be any confusion over that. Finding a compounding pharmacy. You can either use a local compounding pharmacy, and if your community is not too small, there probably is one around there. Or you can use an online pharmacy that's going to mail the medications out to the patient. Either of them are a possibility. If you want to use a local compounding pharmacy, you want to check in to make sure that they do provide atropine and that they provided the dosages you want. I found when I was initially looking that a couple of compounding pharmacies around me just simply didn't do ophthalmic preparations at all. If you don't find one that you think is going to work well for you in your community, look into the online pharmacies, and there's a few of them around, and some of them even specialize only in ophthalmic medications. I'll have my email address at the end if somebody's curious on which one I use. I don't mind letting you know that if you want to just shoot me an email. And I also think it's helpful to get some pricing so that you can give your patients the entire expected cost, because of course they have what they're paying your clinic and they also have what they're paying the pharmacy for their drops. So if you can give them the expected cost for the drops, that's going to help them out quite a bit there as well. One other thing you can ask is, do they preserve the drops? And if so, what do they preserve the drops with? The most common preservative is BAK. BAK is irritative to the ocular surface, and if they're going to use the drop every single day for an extended period of time, you're going to need to decide if you think you're good with that or not. Setting your follow-up schedule. I think I touched on this before in my clinic. I follow them in the first year every 3 months. We do an auto-refraction, we do a subjective refraction, and we get an axial length measurement. And then we use that to try to determine, do we think we're on track, or do we think we need to adjust that treatment along the way? And if we're getting really good stability, then we'll kind of spread those visits out a little bit on most patients, especially as they get older, because they're not likely to change as much anyway. And we have a little bit of data after tracking them for a while that we've been able to control it pretty well there. And then if they are a higher risk, or if we're struggling a little bit with being completely sure that we have the appropriate dosage or that we have enough stability, we'll continue to monitor them a little bit more frequently as well. So that's basically the idea of how we prescribe it and how I would recommend following patients and adjusting treatment. A couple other things to touch on. Do you need to measure axial length to provide myopia management services? And that's become a lot more popular topic just because the benefit of axial length has been talked about a lot. And I do think there's a tremendous amount of benefit. I'm sure you can tell that from me touching on that at various points in this talk. My take on this is you do not have to measure axial length. But if you can, you should, because it's a really powerful technology. And the way I look at it is more data is always more helpful, no matter what you're doing in medicine. So if you have a patient who's a glaucoma suspect, do you want to get a visual field? Do you want to get an OCT? Do you want to get a pachymetry? Or do you want to get gonioscopy? Well, the answer is you want to get all of them, right? They're all beneficial in determining the risk for this patient, and do you need to treat them, and is your treatment working? So you want to get all of those, including their intraocular pressures. And when you get that, you're going to be a better eye doctor, and you're going to provide better care for that patient. So I absolutely would not hesitate and wait to provide myopia management if you don't have a method to measure axial length. But I do think it's important, and you should kind of prioritize that and budget for that expense and try to add that when you can, because it is becoming the gold standard. Given that we need more providers than we currently have doing myopia management, yeah, go ahead and jump in with both feet and use Atropine or soft lenses or Ortho-K, but understand the benefit of that as a really helpful tool, and probably plan on bringing that in when you can. A couple more notes on measuring axial length there too. There's a few different ways there. You can use an A scan, you can use an optical biometer, and there's certainly pros and cons for both of them there. Optical biometry is incredibly quick, it's non-contact, and it's patient friendly, and it's very accurate. A scans can also be very accurate, and I think there's a little bit more dependent on doing the test very correctly. And if you do, that can certainly be very, very accurate as well. It's and the portability of it can help out. The cost for A scans are less of a barrier for entry as well. So you can look at the different methods for measuring it. In my clinic, I do use optical biometry. We do a lot of myopia management, so it's a little easier to justify the cost, and maybe a little bit more difficult if you're just getting into myopia management. And if you are, you may want to look at doing something like an A scan, or if you have multiple offices, maybe it's better to have something portable or something that you can afford to add in multiple clinics, and that's a really good thing to consider there as well. And if you do want to do biometry, there's several new ones on the market. They kind of all came out around the same time, and some of those are really geared specifically toward myopia management. Which gives you some different software that you can lean on. And some of them combine this biometry with other useful functions like an autorefractor, which you're going to want to get on these patients anyway, or like a topography that you'll certainly want to get if you're doing orthokeratology. If you want a biometer in your office and you don't want to use, if you don't want to spend that kind of cash on it, you can always look for like a used IOL master. And I used one for years, and it served me really, really well. The downside is it may not be serviced anymore if you were to have a problem, but mine worked extremely well. We never had any trouble with it. It was incredibly reliable and very accurate. So there's a few ways to get into that and start measuring axial length, and it is something that I think is very helpful there. And as we get to the end, again, this slide may very well not be necessary at all, because you guys are probably very interested in myopia management if you're not already doing it. But there's not nearly enough of us doing this. There is almost certainly a need for myopia management in the community that you practice, unless you literally only see geriatric patients, in which case you're probably not attending this talk right now anyway. It's great from a patient care perspective, and it's great from a practice management perspective. Our most loyal patients are our myopia management patients, whether it's Atropine or Ortho-K or soft dual focus lenses. Those patients love you. Those parents love you. They love what you're doing for your child, and you get tons of referrals. And that's the key. When you get a referred patient from a good patient, they are also good patients usually, and they're compliant and they appreciate what you do. So it's very financially rewarding because, you know, there's that annuity that you get. You're going to see them every year. And even though your fees are quite often less after the first year for any myopia management program, they're higher than what you're usually going to have for a child. And it's a win-win, right? The parent and the patient are getting a wonderful service that's going to increase their likelihood of good eye health over time and improve their quality of life. And you're going to, you know, have that annuity that's bringing in more money into your practice. And again, this is ODsonFinance. That does matter. But beyond that, it's also professionally rewarding. And I just love seeing those patients come in. Over time, I see fewer and fewer of the regular general eye care patients, and I see more and more of my myopia management patients. And I just absolutely love those days where I go in and I'm just seeing one after another, and they're happy patients. And we see that we're having a positive effect and keeping that well controlled. And so loads of fun on that. So both from a financial and a quality of life and professional standpoint, it's a wonderful thing. And if you don't intend to provide this service, just like you would for hopefully for vision therapy if you don't provide it, or a scleral lens if you don't provide it, if it's going to benefit the patient, get them that care and refer them to a colleague who does do that. And that's going to do it for mine. We're kind of at the end of our time, and I put my email address there. If there's things that I didn't cover or things that I didn't make clear and you have a question, please feel free to reach out to me. And, or, you know, if there's something specific about a very specific product, you know, we try not to have any bias toward any products or companies, but if you want to email me, I'm happy to try to go into a little bit more detail. So that's going to do it for me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dwight. That was fantastic. And 100% agree with you. Best patients are the myopia management patients. And as our clinics continue to grow in that aspect, we see that too. Chris has about 5 questions. We got quite a few questions for your lecture.
Okay.
So he's going to go ahead and rattle those off. And while he does that, Cheryl and Caroline, if you want to get ready, and then we'll jump onto your lecture in just a couple minutes.
Yeah, Dwight, that was awesome. There's a million questions and we don't have time for all of them. So I'm sure you'll be getting a bunch of emails after this.
Sure.
but here's a few. Is there a washout period when switching from atropine to a different myopia management modality?
I do not. I switch them over. You know, I don't know that I can speak for other doctors, but I do not wash them out. I'll go ahead and you know, in some cases we do combine it anyway. But if we're not going to, I would usually go ahead and just stop that. In most cases, I find the patient and the parent are interested in continuing myopia management in some form and continuing it as quickly as they can. When you've educated the parents really well, they care about myopia management and they want to get that as much as they can. So I generally don't do a washout.
Gotcha. And how often are you cyclopleging at the follow-up visits?
At the follow-up visits, I don't cycloplege maybe as frequently as some other people. I do like to get a good cycloplegic refraction before we start. If I'm finding that we're on track with the axial length and that the refractive data and the axial length is falling in line, I don't see a need in most cases at these annual visits to do a cycloplegic again.
Awesome. At what age range do you typically feel comfortable starting atropine?
That's a great question. I don't know that it's that I wouldn't feel comfortable doing it. I don't start it younger than 5 or 6 very frequently, but I think a lot of that is just they don't tend to present to our office. You know, when you're looking at the typical ages that patients tend to become nearsighted, and it's frustrating when they're younger than that because they have a worse prognosis. You know, you're typically seeing around 7 to 8 is the most common ages I see it, and sometimes we do see it a little bit younger. I haven't made an absolute cutoff as the youngest that I would treat, but I've certainly treated patients who are in the 5 to 6 year old range.
Awesome. So 2 more questions. One is, how effective is atropine not dosed daily, like every other day?
When parents ask me questions, I'm very careful to not answer when I don't have data from a study to back me up. I tell them that they should be consistent with dosing it because the studies require that the people in the studies used it consistently. And so I feel like I can give them great answers when they're going to use it that way. And everybody's going to miss a dose once in a while, just like an orthokeratology patient's going to miss wearing their mold once in a while. But I think I would actually hesitate to answer that question because I don't have a study to back me up on it.
Gotcha. So, and how about what is the normal or average expected axial length growth?
So it depends on the age, and there are some growth curves that you can look up, and I actually keep some of those in my office. I'll keep them pulled up on my browser, you know, some of my saved tabs, or you know, you can print them out and have like a laminated chart that you can reference, because of course when you talk about the studies that show the average amount of progression for a given amount of axial length, sure, you can remember 2 diopters per millimeter or 2.4, whichever one you want to use, but we're not going to remember an entire chart. So we print those out. The younger they are, the quicker it changes. And instead of trying to remember what's the expected axial length change for a 6-year-old versus a 9-year-old versus a 12-year-old, I kind of use that somewhat arbitrary cutoff of about 10 years old. And we try to keep it less than about 0.02 for a under 10 years, and then sorry, 0.2 for a 10-year-old and under, and 0.1 for a for older than that. So that's my cutoff, 0.2 if they're young patients, and then as they get older, 0.1 per year.
Awesome. Dwight, that was an awesome presentation. We'll pause the questions there so we can keep going. But like I said, I'm sure you'll be getting a lot of emails after this.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you again, Dwight. And then we're going to have a panel after the next lecture as well. So I'm sure some of those questions will come up then. And let's go ahead and head into our 3rd hour of COPE-approved CE. And we're going to have Dr. Cheryl Chapman and Dr. Caroline Cauchi go ahead and jump on. And this is going to be a great lecture. It's going to be a 2-lecture lecture, and they're going to talk all about the practice management aspects of myopia management. So we're done with the science and clinical aspects. Now we're jumping into myopia management. All right, so Carolyn and Cheryl, if you want to take over, I see your screen is already shared. Feel free.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. So I'm Dr. Cheryl Chapman, and I'm super excited to kind of end up this CE here today. I know it's a Sunday morning and it's been really long, so hopefully you'll find that with Caroline and I together, we'll be able to provide you something that's really kind of engaging and interesting. I'm blown away by all of the amazing questions that we've seen come in. And it's always fun to listen to some of these other lectures who I've heard before, and I know that they're very, very good. So let's go ahead and kind of jump on in here. So Dr. Caroline Guerrero-Cauchi is from San Diego. I am from Gretna, Nebraska. So you'll get some perspectives from 2 different parts of the country here today. We both are members of the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control, and we're both board members for that as well. Caroline, do you want to give yourself a little bit of an introduction?
Sure. I am also in charge of fellowship for the International and the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Management. And you're going to have to forgive me today if I start coughing, because I tested positive for COVID. And it's not that bad, but it does leave me with a bit of a cough here. So if I cough, I'll just mute myself. So just sorry for that.
Which means maybe I'll have to talk more, which is okay. I mean, not great for the rest of you, but that's okay. I like to talk. So neither Caroline nor I have any financial disclosures. This will be a very open discussion with very little commercial interest bias. And I'll let you start with part 1, Caroline.
Okay, so what we want to do right now is talk about the cost to society for the myopia epidemic. Next slide. So we look at it in a global sense. First of all, there's the medical cost, because you have disease management as a function of the myopia increase. And then there's a surgical repair, such as a detached retina. There's the optical cost, because they have to keep on getting new glasses all the time. And then, of course, the social cost with the patients getting disabled if they have become low vision. They don't produce as well if they have gigantically thick glasses. And some of the jobs that they might be eligible for, they aren't eligible for if they're super nearsighted. So at the bottom here, we look at how much it actually costs to the US and to worldwide. There's a lot of money going into increased myopia.
So really what you're telling us, Caroline, is that when patients push back on cost for myopia management therapies, that you can remind them that a lot of times it means they're not having to purchase all these other things that they would normally be purchasing.
Good point. Are you taking this part?
Oh, sure, why not?
Can
Okay,
we go and trade back and forth?
Sure. Okay, so you know, what you'll see is that with myopia management, or with myopia epidemic in general, we can see that these patients need to be in stronger contacts, stronger glasses. They're having to change that stuff out more. Yeah, you get a lot of money from that stuff too, right? But you also get money from myopia management. So I would say for us, the revenue is always there. But if you have a patient that you let get to a really high level of myopia and then they start having complications with that, if you have a very medical practice, great. Like, then you can continue to take care of those patients. But if you don't have a very medical practice, you're going to lose a lot of those patients because they're going to have to go somewhere else to manage their glaucoma. They're going to have to go somewhere else to get their cataracts removed. They're going to go somewhere else to get their retinas fixed. And by the way, they're going to go somewhere else to have LASIK. And how often do those LASIK patients come back? As long as they're seen well, they think they're fine. That's one of the scariest things ever, I think, is that you have these patients with these super long retinas. Maybe they've got a 27 or a 28 millimeter retina, and they're not getting eye care because they think they're fine. But really, they are still very, very high risk. Go ahead,
So
Cheryl.
what is our role? Well, we have two choices. We can just say status quo, that's the way it goes, and not worry about it. Or we can be proactive, and we can develop a myopia management specialty. We can identify all of the candidates that might be appropriate candidates for myopia management, and we can educate our patients and our staff, and and suggest treatment. There's a funny black thing coming up in front of me. Sorry. And we can suggest treatment. So we can be proactive, and that's really the name of the game today. Next slide.
And I think everybody here is ready for that. I think that's one reason why they joined in with today's webinar. Okay, so it's really important, if you do want to move forward with myopia management in your practice, that you kind of create a strategy, right? It's kind of a big thing for a lot of doctors to incorporate a myopia management practice. And there's a lot of new protocols that need to be put in place. And so you have to be kind of thoughtful about it, and you kind of have to come up with your game plan. So that's sort of what today's lecture is about. So first, we're going to start by talking about some of the costs that you might want to think about or consider when you want to start your myopia management specialty practice. So this goes from, you know, what the overhead costs might be, and like how you're going to find dollars for that. But then also, how are you going to find time in order to implement this?
So one of the really important things is to educate yourself and to educate your staff. And we have developed at the Academy a certification program that will help you not only become educated, but also show to your staff and to the general public that you are certified to do this. And in your office, it would be great to have a myopia management liaison, a go-to person who can answer all the questions your patients might have and the other staffs might have, and who also will do the fee presentation if you're not very good at that. Some doctors can do a great job of presenting fees and other doctors can't. And so if you can educate your staff so that they can take over and answer a lot of questions, and especially because they're the first ones that a patient will contact, then you're going to have a big leg up on everybody. Next slide.
Before I go on to the next slide, I just want to give an extra plug for this. And if those of you who are on the lecture today haven't heard of this before, the CMM and the CMN, they're new certifications. This is new to the industry, and this is something that was created by the AAOMC in order to give doctors credibility. So, you know, a lot of doctors, they want to get these extra certifications. They want to get a fellowship. They want to be FAAO. And we have at AAOMC, we have a lot of doctors who contact us and say, I want to get a fellowship with orthokeratology. But it's really hard to do because there's a lot of prerequisites that they need to meet before they're able to do that. So we developed these certification programs to be kind of like a stepping stone to that. They're much easier to attain. And it has to do with myopia management in general, not just orthokeratology. And that CMN, that's for your staff. And anything that you can do to kind of highlight your staff's like knowledge in this, when you're trying to talk to patients about something new like myopia management, and it's totally a foreign concept to them. They've never heard of it. They think it's kind of weird. They think maybe it's voodoo science. To have a staff member who's actually certified in it, that's huge. So if you do these certifications, you really need to spotlight it. You need to make sure that your patients know how very special your practice is because of this. And so just like jump on board with that.
Good point. So what we've done here is try to tell you a little bit about what it will cost to educate your staff. And you can go from very little to expensive. If you send them to conferences, some of the conferences don't cost anything, and some of them are as little as $400. You might spend more if you're going to pay for their travel and their room and everything. Again, the seminars, same kind of thing. In your office, you can actually educate your own staff in myopia management. That doesn't cost anything over your lunch hour. During off hours, that's fine, but if you're taking them off to a little corner and educating them, then they're going to be short-staffed. And then, of course, after hours, you're going to pay for overtime. But it doesn't matter. It's well worth it if you get a well-trained staff.
Yeah, my staff, I have one staff member who loves myopia management so much. I can trust her to take any phone call from any potential patient who's got questions about it. And she can answer pretty much anything that they ask. And they ask in-depth questions. And I often tell her, kind of like a little ego boost for her. I often tell her, I think you know more about myopia management than the majority of optometrists in the United States, because optometry really needs to kind of beef up the education that they're getting on this. So yeah, it is well worth it, because it will save you, the doctor, a lot of time if your staff is able to take over some of these conversations. These are not short conversations. These patients have just a ton of questions. It can be a 20 or 30-minute conversation sometimes. Okay, so I'll take this slide. There's a lot of things that we need to be thinking about with myopia management in terms of sort of what we have in the office, and going to conferences that teach you to be, full scope. A lot of us are always thinking about, we want to be full scope. And particularly with ODsonFinance, I know a lot of the doctors here are talking about, okay, well, what's the return on investment, or how am I going to make up this stuff? It is good to be thoughtful about this, because when you're doing the in-person educations, you want to be able to see the new technologies, right? Like a lot of people need topographers, they don't have one yet, or they want to check out the axial length instruments, they don't have one yet. And so going to the in-person conferences and being able to walk the exhibit floor and being able to take scans on colleagues, have your own scans taken, kind of touch and feel, that really helps. And I think it also, when you're at these in-person conferences and you're able to go out into the hallway during the breaks and talk to other doctors and just say, well, what do you do? And how do you present this? And I've kind of struggled with this part of it. Do you have a different strategy on that? I think anybody that attends Vision by Design will say that's where they do half their learning, is during the coffee break. And so it's really nice. It's really nice to get that. But then also there's just a ton of energy, right? And that energy is what you can bring home with you, that excitement. And if you are able to bring staff members, yes, again, it costs a little bit more, but if you can get a key staffer involved at a on-site in-person conference and get them very excited, they're going to help bring that back to your office, which helps you be able to implement some of these new ideas. And so, of course, you are going to spend a little bit more to go to these conferences, but they will pay off dividends in the long run. Of course, online is good. We've had you all here today, but I think supplementing with in-person is always a really, really good strategy.
And just to put a little plug there, we have a boot camp for newcomers, which is really, really good, because what it does is it keys up on somebody who's very new to myopia management and takes them from soup to nuts. And a lot of the conferences you'll go to are a little more advanced, and you really need to know how to start your practice in myopia management, and that's what our boot camp does for newcomers.
I'll just also say the boot camp is very non-intimidating, right? So like everybody's kind of coming with the same purpose, the same goal. You do have doctors who are already fitting Ortho-K, but they're coming to boot camp because they feel like they just aren't as comfortable with it as they want to be. Or maybe they're doing Atropine, but they also want to learn Ortho-K, things like that. So the boot camp is very comprehensive. Again, not intimidating at all, very welcoming. But there's enough doctors there who are established to kind of get that learning from them, to kind of like a mentor, if you will. So I'll let you take this one, Caroline.
Well, you joke. Okay, do you have COVID? No.
No, I don't think so.
Now, in terms of membership, of course, we're all members of all sorts of different things, but we have found it very, very useful to be members of the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Management. This is not a Johnny-come-new kind of thing. This organization's been around since long before 2000, so we've been doing this for a long time. It's not very expensive per year, but what we get are a lot of referrals, not only from other doctors in the areas, but also patients go onto our website and find us. There's this online Google group, which is a way of coming up with different, you post a question and you'll get an answer not only from people in the United States, but also from across the world, because this is not just an American academy. It's also linked to our international academy. So you may get an answer from Australia or Europe, something like that. You also get discounts. So this is a very, very valuable thing if you're into Ortho-K and myopia management.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. A lot of the questions that were coming up on some of the earlier lectures today are all like discussion threads that I frequently see going on in our Google group and our Discord group. So, that's the kind of stuff that people talk about. They're like, hey, what solutions are you guys using? Or, hey, what axial length instrument are you using? But to be fair, this is this lecture today really doesn't have any commercial bias. The AAOMC has no commercial bias either. We're totally agnostic. We don't promote one company over another company. We don't promote one lens design over another lens design. And there are other organizations out there besides just the AAOMC. But whatever organization you belong to, I do feel like you need to make sure that they are free of commercial bias. Don't just go off of something that is being paid for by a particular company, because you want to make sure that you're seeing the full picture, the full field, without somebody trying to like feed you ideas. Okay, so
incentives. Yeah, I'll take it. Staff incentives, some people don't like to do this, other people do. The reality is that positive reinforcement does work, and you can think about the incentive you want to do. You can set a target of maybe 1 or 2 new myopia management patients per week or per month, or you can do it for an individual and bonus them. And the bonuses have to be specific to the person, because some of them don't care about money. They care about maybe some time off or a trip to a spa or something like that. And so you have to really kind of ask them for a menu. Hey, what would motivate you? And then ask them and design it for them specifically. Of course, you don't have to do this. It's just that it does seem to work very nicely. And so it might be something to think about.
I think it's always, just a little practice management thought here too. You'll see these surveys over and over again. You've probably all heard this before, but always remember it. People aren't always motivated by money. One of the strongest motivators is appreciation. And so if you even just write somebody a handwritten note that tells them how much you appreciate them and how you think they're doing a really good job, that's crazy effective. Like people really respond well to that. It doesn't have to be expensive. Let's talk about equipment. That's a pretty big price range there, Caroline.
Well, it's because there is a big price range.
Yes. So there was a point in time where everyone was like, oh, just ask your cataract surgeon if they have an old IOL master that they want to get rid of. I think we've gotten to the point where most of that stuff has gotten snapped up. It's a little bit harder to find used equipment now, especially with the axial length instrument. Maybe not quite so hard with topographers though. There's, I think, probably still a pretty good market out there for used topographers. And so, yeah, it's okay to get used, because even some of the used stuff is still pretty new. What you do want to be careful of though is that you don't get so old that it's no longer being serviced by the company, or that it will no longer work with some of the newer computer systems. So like if you buy something but it only works with Microsoft 7, you're gonna kick yourself, right? So just kind of be thoughtful of that.
And you know, you look at that price tag and you think, it will pay for itself. Trust me, it will pay for itself in spades. You just got to jump in and buy it because it is one of my favorite pieces of equipment.
Which one is one of your favorite pieces? You're talking about the topographer in general?
Yeah. You know, of course, I love all of them. I tell them I love them all equally. But I mean, once you get that, you'll be like, wow, how did I live without this thing?
I love my topographer so much that I actually have 2 different topographers now. I have the Placido base, and I also have the Scheinflug. I can never say that word. But now I'm like, people are like, well, which one do you like better? I'm like, I can't decide. If I can justify 2 topographers, surely people can justify 1 topographer. And I don't have a crazy big practice. I have a normal practice. It's normal.
And these are just some considerations. We have to kind of kick it up a notch because Dwight dribbled onto our time.
Oh, okay.
And so we were already talking about that. You know, make sure there's lots of options for how the maps are displayed. Is the display easy? And you want to, of course, use the thing before you actually buy it. And that's one of the advantages of going to these conferences, because you can get your hands on it and they can show you, oh, look at this, look at this, look at this. So don't just buy it off the internet for sure.
Yeah, you know, exhibit halls are a great place to test out topographers. At VBD, we do have an evening event called Nibbles and Knowledge, where some of the vendors will set up displays, and that's again a very non-intimidating forum where people can come and talk one-on-one with the vendors. A little bit less crazy than in an exhibit floor. Cool. Well, can I talk about this one? You know, this is my favorite thing ever. So I love talking about axial length, and I thought Dwight did such a good job with it during his atropine discussion today. I do believe that axial length is moving more towards standard of care now with regards to myopia management. But I do also want to reiterate what Dwight said is, you know, the big question is, do we have to measure axial length to do myopia management? No, you don't have to. We're more interested in getting people on board with myopia management, getting more practitioners comfortable with it and doing it and offering it, because man, there's a lot of myopes out there, right? There's enough myopes to go around. But what my goal is that all doctors have a really way up high on their wish list is to get their optical biometer as soon as possible, because once you have it, you will realize that you wish you had it sooner. I will be talking about axial length specifically at the boot camp at Vision by Design conference in September. So I can't get too far into that today due to time constraints. But if you do have axial length, you can get return on your investment so fast by just measuring, like Dwight said, measuring kids, all kids. They can be hyperopic, they can be 5 years old, they can be, I've done it on as young as 2 years old. And if you start to get kind of a snapshot of what that particular patient's rate of progression is, then you can start that conversation on myopia management sooner. And you can start the patient on myopia management as soon as you feel like they're getting an uptick in their rate of progression. Sometimes I'm having patients back in 3 months or 6 months who aren't even myopic yet, just because I feel like they're at really high risk and I feel like they're really just right about to transition. And so if you're getting some patients to return sooner than they otherwise would have, simply because you have the ability to measure axial length, then you're going to start having this pay for itself in no time at all. So I won't get any deeper into that today, but.
Well, yeah, I want to add one more thing, and that is that unfortunately, a lot of times, somebody said it earlier in the talking, you might have a person who's a minus 0.75 and you're thinking, okay, that's pretty low risk. And then you measure them and they're 26 millimeters in optical length. And you didn't even know that. And if you don't have one of these things, you're going to think, oh, they're low risk, when they aren't anything but low risk. And that's crucial right there. So it pays for itself.
It's interesting that you say that, Caroline. I have a patient that comes to mind. He's like a plus 50, but his Ks, and he's like totally normal otherwise, but his Ks are like 38 and 39. And yeah, he's got a super long eye. And so we're watching him. And if he changes at all, we're just going to start him on Atropine while he's still a little plus, or maybe Plano. Another example would be my daughter. She's 15. She's got a 25.5 millimeter eye when she was a minus 0.5. And again, she's got a flat K, about a 40, and she's had a retinal hole. And I'm really glad that I can manage her with as full a scope as possible. All right, next slide. Cool. So let's talk about soft myopia management and how easy that is to implement from a financial perspective. You all know that most of the time you can get your fit sets without any charge or cost whatsoever. So that's easy. We don't have to talk too much about that. With Ortho-K, sometimes you are paying for those fit sets. Even if you plan on fitting software design lenses, sometimes it's really helpful to also have some fit sets on hand so that you can just kind of test out what a certain base curve might look on a patient's eye, or so that you can test out a patient's acceptance of being able to put a lens on the eye. As you can see here, there's a variety of fit sets available on the market. There are a variety of costs with this. And so when you go to conferences that are very specific for Ortho-K, you will have manufacturers there that have fit sets that you can look, you can see what they've got, you can talk to them about pros and cons, and you can purchase them there if you want to. Let's get into
talk about internal marketing now. So what we want to do when we're internally marketing is try to promote this myopia management. And one of the ways you can do this very inexpensively is to put it on a little tablet, and every patient that comes in say, well, while you're waiting for the doctor, why don't you watch this? And then you make yourself a really nice PowerPoint, and they can hold it in their hand and go through it, or you can put it on the television screen in your lobby, and it just cycles through day after day after day with the same thing. And patients will come in and sit down and go, oh, I just saw that up there on the wall. I want to talk to you a little bit about this. My granddaughter, blah, 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 blah. And what it does is just put that in their head.
Yeah, speaking of internal marketing, I would say axial length is a little bit of internal marketing too. If you measure axial length on all these kids, and then you just tell the patient why you're keeping an eye on that, then if a year down the road, 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, that kid transitions, you've already put that idea in their head. Another thing that I think is really good internal marketing is any parent who is myopic or post LASIK, just tell them, I do this, by the way. You know how your prescriptions changed all the time when you were a kid? We don't have to do that anymore. Like, we now have things we can do to stop progression of nearsightedness. And the parents are always like, whoa, really? And then they want to know more. And they want to talk a lot about it. And then you can hand them off to your CMN tech, who you've just highly trained, and they can have a more in-depth conversation if they want to. But yeah, a lot of that internal marketing is just education to your patients, right?
Is yours?
Sure. So, we all have different softwares that we use. I know we have a really nice vendor on here today that does patient marketing, and I'm sure they could help with some of these items. But yeah, it's so easy to create things that you can send out to your patients. You can pay a company to do it, or you can create them yourself if you have enough time or the expertise in that area. But you can usually hire some sort of software, or download some sort of software, or have like a monthly fee where you are able to do email blasts for not very much money. If you have
I'll take it. So you can make your own. You actually can make your own phone on hold. It sometimes can be really great, and then sometimes it can be really terrible. So if you want to have a really professional phone on hold, you might have a company do it for you, but that's going to cost a lot more money. And in the beginning, maybe you're not going to have that kind of budget. So knowing that you can actually do it on your own is fine, but also as you get a little more into this, you may just have it to be a little bit more professional. Next slide.
I would say Google ads can start to get a little bit more expensive, and you really kind of have to watch your budget on this because it can start to add up pretty fast. But they can be very effective. There's so many changes, I feel like, though, with like search engine optimization and all that. And like, for me personally, I feel like that's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, nor do I want to spend the time to stay up on all of that. So this is one where if you want to do it, it might be helpful to maybe hire a company that does this professionally. Any other thoughts on that, Caroline?
Nope, I think we need to get moving because we're getting short on time.
We have, by my count, about 23 minutes. We need to make sure we do 50 minutes total, and then we'll have 10 minutes discussion.
Okay.
So I think we're okay. And again, blogging, like patients love, they know blogging, they love blogging, they love to read blogs. And if you're a good writer, go for it. You can create your own blog. You can like put links on it on your website. You can attach articles that are being published on all these online journals online. You know, so you've got just, there's so much out there that you guys can like incorporate into these blogs. And again, the search engine optimization companies, like those are, again, could start to get a little bit hefty in price, but the blogging you can do for little to no cost.
And so the whole point of this talk is that, you know, showing you that you can do it for a little bit or you can do it for more. And these are what your options are. You know, a website, you want to make sure your website is updated to include myopia management. That's huge. And that's not going to cost you a whole lot of money. Some people even create their own myopia management website, just only that. And that's going to be a little bit more pricey. But again, these are really ways that patients who don't know who you are will find you. And that can pay off with just one new Ortho-K fit.
Not only will patients be able to find you, other doctors will be able to find you. If I've got a patient who's moving out of state, you know, I use a doctor finder, but sometimes I'm also like going and looking like where their town is. And like, I'll look at doctors' websites in their town and I'm looking to see, do they have myopia management on their website? And if they do, like, what does it look like they have? Does it look like they're only just doing atropine, or does it look like they're only just doing soft contacts, or does it look like they're pretty full scope? Does it look like they're measuring axial length? Things like that. Okay, so, and of course, Facebook, you're all familiar with Facebook, but don't forget about some of the other ones, Instagram, Twitter. If you have a staff member who's really good at this stuff, again, get them trained well enough so that they know what they're talking about. And then, you know, kind of let them loose with this and just review the ads that they create, especially if you are trying to, let's say you're trying to whittle down your practice and get rid of some of those paid vision plans. And then maybe the schedule is not quite as full. Like, that's a great time to work on myopia management. Always utilize that time, right? We don't just need to like dust off the frames every time we're slow. We can have a staff member say, okay, go back there and sit back there for an hour, hour and a half, whatever, and just like create a little a set of posts that we can schedule over the next 2 months. And you can do paid ads on Facebook too for not very much. That's very inexpensive.
TV ads.
You want to go, Caroline?
Yeah, TV ads and radio. I don't know if anybody has done it in the past, but those tend to get pretty expensive because you have to do them over and over and over and over. And then the price keeps going up and up and up and up. And right now, I don't think we really need it. We have so many other ways of contacting people and patients that might be a little bit more costly in terms of what your initial budget is.
So what I'm really excited about is the fact that in the last couple of years, we've had some of these big companies like Cooper Vision, like J&J kind of jump on board with some of their FDA approved products. And with that, I envision a future where any kind of like patient education or, you know, these big campaigns that are on TV, that are on radio, they're going to probably be coming from some of the big companies that have a little bit deeper pockets than the individual practices do. But that all feeds into us, right? And so it's really important, I think, for companies that are doing these big awareness campaigns, I think it's really important to make sure that we are, you know, supporting them as well, because ultimately, I think they're going to be one of the things that helps feed patients into the funnel.
This is yours.
Sure. Okay, so if one of the things that I think is really awesome for building a myopia management practice, if your city or town has a Chinese school, a lot of times they have like these community centers, schools, places where a lot of the Asian members of the community will congregate. If you can develop a relationship with them, a lot of times they will let you, for a small fee, come in and do like a lecture for the community, and you can present to them what you can do for myopia management. And that's really important because a lot of these patients in the Asian community already know what myopia management is, or at least they already know what Ortho-K is. And so a lot of them are very interested. And so that's one way that you can create some of these like patient seminars. You can also do stuff in your office. You can do stuff I know this says patient parent, but you can also have stuff in your office for other doctors in your community. If you want to get referrals from these doctors and you want them to know that you do this, like you can have doctors there. I've done seminars for local pediatricians, for local ophthalmologists, you know, anything that you can do to spread your name is good. And I do get, believe it or not, referrals from ophthalmology, which, you know, that's kind of hard to get that. I do get referrals from other optometrists who maybe they do, okay, so maybe they do some forms of myopia management, but they have a patient that they feel like should be an Ortho-K. I was wrong on time, Carolyn. We have about 5 minutes left. So,
yeah, so let's blow through these next slides.
All right, let's do it. Go ahead.
Okay, referral websites, you see them here. Sometimes you get to pay for it, sometimes it's free, but you got to look at it carefully and get some referrals on the referral website, because that can be costly and you're not going to get much return on investment. Next slide.
We do have a doctor finder on the AAOMC website, and that is included.
That's free. Yeah, that doesn't cost anything.
The brochure, you can make your own brochures. You can ask colleagues from around the country that you know who are doing this if they're willing to share their stuff that you can, you know, customize for yourself. So that's pretty inexpensive.
See, these things you can make on your own. Training booklets, you can make this on your own. Just get your computer out, and these are training booklets for Ortho-K, for myopia management. You don't have to pay for them.
A lot of the companies, like Ortho-K companies and stuff, I know my site has great patient education booklets, as do a lot of the Ortho-K companies that you can share with your patients for insertion removal, all that stuff. This is great. Customize these little bags, then patients can put all their stuff in there and keep it all together. And it's fun when you do this. Every time they come back to their follow-ups, if they're following your instructions, they bring their little bag in. And I always, I love it when I see the little bags show up.
Yeah, and a lot of times they use them for lunch bags and then bring them back to school, and then the kids say, oh, it's that, blah, blah, blah. And you get to advertise yourself that way too. Solutions, you know, it sort of depends on whether you want to supply them with a year's supply, or if you want to just give them a trial amount of solutions. So it could be anything from free to $250 out of your pocket. It just depends on what you want to do.
Sell drops and solutions in clinic. We do that. It's great to incentivize these kids with a positive experience of food and drink and toys in the office. And that's very inexpensive, but it makes the kids much happier to be there and more compliant with therapy. Pharmaceuticals, we've talked about this, I think, pretty in depth. Just to say the cost usually ranges about $40 to $50 per month. Most patients, it's not covered by insurance. Patients are paying for it out of pocket. Most offices do not supply the drops, but it is something you can do that some doctors do. The molds cost usually between $95 to $150 per lens, depending on what corneal mold you're using, whether it's off the shelf or like a software designed lens. Sometimes they will require to pay for remakes, and sometimes the remakes are covered depending on the company. And we expect that a mold, if it's not broken or lost, will usually last about a year, maybe a year and a half.
And then with the soft lenses, again, wholesale somewhere between $575 and $750. It's quite expensive wholesale cost. So let's get this moving again. These are just your costs. So what we did is we put up this expense summary for you so that you can get a sense of what you're going to take to start up and then what it's going to take to go on and keep doing myopia management.
Yep.
Your
Okay,
time,
and then,
you know, why don't we blow through this as fast as we can, because this part's not, you know, I mean, it's good, but
so, and I think we've already kind of, some of the other doctors have kind of already been talking about the follow-up visits and whatnot. And I think everybody can get copies of these slides. Don't present the fees yourself if you're not good at it. Let your technician do it. Just make sure they're fully trained. Let's see.
yeah, these are just times that it takes. Let's blow through this. Again, this is just basically how much time it's going to take to fit the patients. And, you know, you'll look at our slides and you can look at it later. We'll just, because this doesn't require quite as much talking as the next part does, part 4.
Okay.
But this just gives you a good sense of how much time it takes, because time is money.
Yep.
This is, now we're talking about how you're going to get your money. What's the return on investment now?
That's what everyone's here for, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So I'm going to go straight to this right here. All right. So there's different ways to do this. I think seeing it laid out like this is helpful. You know, we start with this comprehensive eye exam, right? And then you're just determining if somebody's at risk. And if they're at risk, say, all right, we're going to do a consultation. Now, the question is that consultation free? We're going to schedule them back for this. We're going to do a consultation, or they call their new patient. Is that consultation free, or do we have a paid consultation? I've seen it done both ways. If you're just starting out, you may feel like you want to give these free consultations away just because you're trying to get patients in the door, right? And you're just trying to perfect your verbiage and whatnot. But really, they take a long, long time. So I started off doing free consultations, and then I pretty quickly realized I don't want to do that. I started doing paid consultations. That seemed like it was better because I was getting paid for it. So free consultations, whether it's paid or not, then you have to say, okay, do we recommend treatment for this patient, or do we not recommend treatment for this patient? And if it's a free consultation and you're not recommending treatment, then you collect nothing. If it's a paid consultation and you're not recommending treatment, you still get paid, which is nice. If you are recommending treatment, then sometimes some offices will take that paid consultation fee and apply it to the myopia management fee. If it's a free consultation that you're doing and you decide to initiate treatment, then they just have this like myopia management fee that you've predetermined that you're going to charge them.
And we're not telling you how much to charge. We're just giving you this really nice flow chart to give you a sense of what some people do and what you might do.
Yep. And then, you know, this is just a list of what you might do at follow-up visit.
If this is how much you charge the patients, but we better blow through this.
Yep. You can either do a global fee, or you can do separate fees each time they come in. And I know we have a 10-minute discussion period, so we can talk about what people want to talk about the most. Sometimes if you're acquiring a patient from somewhere else, those are sometimes the most time-consuming patients. So charge appropriately for refitting fees. It's a good idea to do a washout fee and to just wash them out and then start over. And that washout fee should be a separate fee. And then insurance, we kind of talked on that on a different talk. So if you break it down and look at doing based on 4,000 patients, not all of them are myopia management patients, but if you're doing like a certain percentage, what maybe you might see.
And what this does is just give you kind of an approximate idea of the income you might be making on your first year by just adding a few of these myopia management patients. And for year 2, more, because you have the first group of patients, but now they're becoming refit.
And you're getting
so fees we can't talk about, but we've got lots of different structures here. This will be a good one to come back to and look at later, because it'll give you a good sense.
Cool. All right. So yeah, let's just I think we just kind of want to wrap up and really spend the rest of the time talking, kind of doing like a question and answer. So I'll just kind of like flip through these slides. Everybody will have access to these slides if they want to read
And
through.
look at them again, because there's a lot on these slides that are very good, but we don't have time to talk about them. This just shows you a template of how to fill in for what you're going to charge.
Mhm. All right, so do you want me to stop my screen share now?
Yeah, you can go ahead and stop your screen share, and then we will get everyone on here. I appreciate the lecture, by the way. That was fantastic information.
Thank you.
And yeah, let's go ahead and get Anith. Are you on right now?
I'm here.
Perfect. All
Cheryl,
right.
Lion, wonderful lecture. Thank you so much. So informative. I'm sorry we had to rush you a little bit, but it was still fantastic.
No problem.
I'm sure we got a lot of questions. There's a couple that I thought that I would bring up to you guys, and you went through a lot of it, but one thing that I would be interested in, what do you think about the future of myopia control and finances? Do you see possibly entry from vision plans trying to get into this modality? Do you see being it more of a commodity, or do you think more specialization can happen and more companies coming in to create more designs for Ortho-K and peripheral soft defocus contact lenses? What do you guys think?
I don't know if Caroline has an opinion here, but I don't know. I think, you know,
Knowing Lion, I think she has an opinion.
yes. You know what Dwight said? I hope they don't, but who knows? I mean, they may eventually. I think it's really important for doctors in general to make sure they're not letting patients like strong arm them into trying to bill it to insurance, making sure that ODs are billing appropriately for this. And making sure that we are using terminology that's different enough and talking about it in ways to help differentiate it, that these are medical devices that are used for different things. These are not regular contacts, right? So I just think it's really important that we as a community of eye care professionals talk about it in a way that helps to try and keep it out of insurances.
Yes, and you know, the thing that I think back on is, you know, there's going to be a different answer 5 years as opposed to 20 or 40 years from now on. And when you think about standard contact lenses, yeah, they're in all of the insurance companies now, but are scleral? No. You know, so things that are more specialized and more medical aren't in the insurance plan. So it may be that they avoid myopia management because it's so much more medical than it is a commodity. So, you know, I'm thinking positively that we'll have many more years of being able to deliver care at our own good reimbursement.
Great. Yeah, I think I'm looking at the chat. I think a lot of us are hoping the same thing. Well, we got some great modalities now. We talked about Ortho-K, peripheral myopic defocus soft contact lenses, Atropine. Where do you see the future? Do you see new treatment options coming in? I know there's other modalities available in other countries, but where do you see the future of myopia control coming in innovation?
It keeps changing every time you turn around. I mean, I write the fellowship exam and I have to change it every 6 months because new stuff comes out. I mean, they've got the spectacle lenses coming out and there's new information, new studies that come out. And so it's going to be typical. It's going to evolve and evolve and evolve, and that's great for us. We just have to be careful to keep up, because if you use old, outdated equipment, you're not going to be as old, outdated information, you're not going to be as effective. And so it'll take a lot of work, but sure, yeah, it's going to go on and get better and better and better.
Well, I think that's one reason why it's really important that we get reimbursed well for it, because you can't just learn this in optometry school and still be doing the same thing 20 years later. When I started using Atropine, I started with 0.01%. Even though I knew it was dose dependent, I would start patients on 0.01%. Why? Because I was using the ATOM2 data, right? But then in 2019, when the LAMP study was published, I was like, oh, well, that explains why I've had to increase concentration on every single one of my Atropine patients. Now I have a peer-reviewed study that tells me that. You know, and so it's really important if you are doing myopia management that you're getting regular CE on it, because it changes like that. You got to stay on top of it. So we deserve to be reimbursed for that.
Absolutely. Charging appropriately is so important. Hey, these custom suits aren't cheap. Cheryl, your and Caroline's outfits aren't cheap. Jonathan's headset isn't cheap. All right, so we're on ODsonFinance event, so we got to make sure we highlight revenue as well. I know we got so many questions that we didn't get to during the with the chat and the Q&A section. So, Chris, are you still with us? Do you have some of those questions lined up for us?
Yeah, I'm here. We have a few questions, more than just a few. So for the panelists, what are your thoughts on Ortho-K for adult patients?
Adult patients?
Adult patients.
Of course, it's wonderful. It's great. It's not just for kids. It's great for people who are in certain professions that can't wear glasses, and some people who can't wear contacts because their eyes are irritated, dry eye people. It's wonderful. I mean, some people just don't want to wear glasses and they don't want to wear contact lenses during the day. I mean, gosh, of course it's good. Yeah. I mean, that's old school. The stuff for kids now is new stuff.
So I was trying to figure out if this question was asking about studies on progressive myopia in adults, or if it was just on are they good candidates for it in general. I think there's not a lot of studies on progressive myopia for adults, but I think clinicians who are doing it see that it does work to slow their progression if needed. It is definitely a viable option. And number two, some things that you want to be thinking about with your adult patients is, okay, well, what is their job? Do they sleep enough? If they're a firefighter who works 24-hour shifts, maybe not, because their sleep schedule is not, it's too erratic, right? Or like an overnight nurse, maybe the sleep schedule is too erratic. So ask about their sleep schedule / work schedule. And then you have to also think about the size of the treatment zone relative to their pupil size. And that's relevant because if the treatment zone is too small, they might have glare and halos with nighttime driving, and adults drive more at night than kids do. And also you need to be thinking about, are they presbyopic or not? And so you want to try to determine if they are presbyopic, you want to make that treatment zone size small enough that they're getting a little bit of the multifocal effect, yet not get those glare and halos at night. So sometimes adult myopes actually should be fit with a little bit higher level fee, because they might require more visits because they're not going to be as happy with their vision and they're going to be picky, and you might have to do more follow-up visits and change that treatment zone size more often with them. So just a little heads up on that. They're not always easier. 24-year-old, yeah, probably is, but a 35, 45-year-old, probably not.
And that's the great thing about myopia management, because the kids aren't usually picky. And so it's just wonderful because they're not, you know, they're happy to have it.
I'm going to interject just real quick here. For individuals that need to go, you got your CE credit. We're going to stay on the panel for about another 5-10 minutes and talk about a few things. But if you need to head out, perfectly fine. All right, Chris, continue.
Yeah. What do y'all think about the Brian Holden Vision Institute calculator, and are you utilizing it?
I like it. I do use it. I don't use it on every single patient. I do change. So there's certain preset things for like Ortho-K, like the percentage of myopia control. So I do set it to what I find in clinic, but I think it's always nice to have a graph that parents are used to seeing. They're used to seeing growth charts at the pediatrician. So showing something that they're familiar with is helpful. So I do use it.
Yeah, same here. I think those technologies are fantastic, and anything that you can do to help illustrate things well for a parent so they can see what you're talking about is super helpful.
Yeah, I don't use it as often as I did when I first started, because I think I can see why you probably reset some of those things on it, Anith, because I feel like sometimes the graph makes it look a little underwhelming. Like it makes it look like it doesn't help as much as you know it's helping. And so I think Myopia has a really good graph too, but it's a little bit harder to work with if you don't have like a paid subscription. But sometimes I will just have like laminated sheets, and I will say, you know, that shows like normal growth curves, and I'll be like, well, this is where you are, and this is the average person your age. So look at how bad your axial length is. And, you know, so I don't know. I just, that Brian Holden one, I feel like the way it shows the data makes it look like myopia management is less impactful than what it really is sometimes.
Are you?
Yeah, I think the Brian Holden one
length
shows
for
about
that process?
45% control, which is pretty underwhelming compared to what, you know, a lot of us are seeing clinically.
Cheryl, are you using the one with the axial length graph too, where it puts them in like the red, yellow, green zone?
You're
I
talking
find I'm using that one more.
Are you talking about with Brian Holden?
No.
Are you talking about
I
myopia?
think it's like the myopia care one.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the alternative one that I'm thinking about. And yeah, I like that one. It's a little bit, I like the visuals on it better.
Awesome. So a couple more questions. How much time, if you're doing an Ortho-K fit, how much time do you give that fit before implementing a change? If
Is this for Ortho-K?
You're
You're saying?
for Ortho-K.
Oh, one of the things I learned early is don't make changes too quick. You'll find out if you just wait and be patient, some of those things will resolve. So, 2 weeks is the minimum, but sometimes, it could be a month, 6 weeks. So the worst thing you can do is make a change too quick in Ortho-K. So give it some time, see how the cornea kind of adapts to the current mold before you make drastic changes, because you might just kind of be chasing your tail. So I would say err on the side of caution, wait a little bit longer. What do you guys think?
Are they asking about a change on the design or a change on the axial length?
Design change.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you gotta give it some time, but not too long, because then the patient gets all discouraged because he can't see very well. But certainly not in a week. If you give it at least 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, I would say 2 to 4 weeks is a good target for that.
And setting expectations helps with that too. When I would come in for like a one-day follow-up, I'll always say, hey, look, we want to make sure that we've got an appropriate fit, that the cornea looks nice and healthy, and that we're moving the right direction on vision. And we don't expect full correction unless they are, a smaller, easier target there. And that kind of reinforces to the parent it's a work in progress, and it's going to take a little bit of time, and we're going to monitor and make sure they get there.
Awesome. So not to get into actual dollar amounts, but do you guys price your Ortho-K and your soft myopia contacts the same, or is one higher than the other?
Oh, yeah, my Ortho-K is higher just because it takes more time, but it depends. We have a whole section on our thing on not how to price, but not with money. Cheryl?
Yes, definitely. You should charge more for something that takes more chair time. And I think the vast majority of doctors doing Ortho-K charge more for that than they do for atropine or soft multifocals. So we didn't really get into this part within the lecture, but you can do like a global fee, and then you can do like a pay per visit fee. Basically, you can do your global fee for 1 year. You can have your global fee encompass 2 years. So there's online calculators. You calculate your chair costs, and then you kind of go and calculate, well, how many hours, how many follow-up visits, and you can use that to help calculate your fees. There's just a lot of different ways it can be done, and there's not a wrong way. And the way you talk about it with your patients, or maybe the part of the country that you live in, will dictate which one might be most successful at your practice. So it's going to vary.
Yeah, GPLI has a great calculator on their website of how to price out things. And this is not specific to myopia control, but calculating your chair costs and what to charge. I might be in the minority. I charge the same across all modalities of myopia control, whether it's Ortho-K, peripheral defocus contacts, or Atropine. I just want them to choose what's best, so that price is an issue. And Ortho-K was definitely take more visits, so I just decided everything is going to cost the same as Ortho-K. So I just thought that was an easier way to present it to patients.
And that's not wrong either. That's not wrong either, because then the patient isn't making a decision based on price.
Right.
So there's more than one way.
Well, that just shows you that all doctors charge differently. So you just have to decide what's comfortable for you.
Yeah.
Another question was, Anith, what do you do if, and I think most doctors do like tiered pricing based on the level of difficulty with Ortho-K. Do you charge more if it's like a higher prescription or higher cylinder, or it's going to be more difficult fit?
No, I just thought it was harder. And I know a lot of offices do that. I want to make the easiest presentation as possible to my patients. So I want them to know when they come in, this is my fee. And I've always been on the same thing with my regular contact lens evaluation fees. I charge the same price. So this is what it costs, and err on the side of the higher. So charge what you want and just keep it one price, and that's worked out pretty well for us. So I don't charge higher for different Ortho-K fees. I think a lot. I've had cases where -2 took forever. All right, you can't assume that some of them are going to be easier than others just because they're a presbyopic or whatever. So some of them can just take longer. So Ortho-K itself, and myopia control itself, takes a lot of time and a lot of expertise. So pick your highest eval and charge that. That's what I go by. But there's nothing wrong with having tiers. I think a lot of, probably the majority of doctors actually, I think, go that route.
So
That's awesome. I really like that one price structure. So last question, I know this was answered, but just to hear from more of the panelists, how much still do you feel comfortable correcting with Ortho-K?
It depends a little bit on your level of expertise. So if you've been fitting lenses for a while, you could do 4 or 5 diopters. I mean, it works. And if you're new at it, there's no way you should touch that because you will go into the poorhouse.
Yeah, it's amazing how high we can go. I know I've done it over 4 sil successfully. Once you get good at a good lens design, it just comes down to like understanding that lens design really, really well. And there's more than one lens design that can do it. It comes to understanding it really, really well and being able to adjust knowing how to troubleshoot and adjust the parameters appropriately. But it can absolutely be done in these high sil cases.
Completely agree. The question is not how much sil you can correct, it's how much experience you have. And then the limits really go out the window.
So fun.
Yeah, and the cool thing about it is you, like Caroline said, don't attack that patient, don't attack that case to begin with, but start smaller. Start with a 1 1/4 sil, work up to a 2 sil, work up to a 275 sil, and you get comfortable at one level, and then try to take on a patient who's a little bit more difficult than that.
All right, panelists, thank you all for your time. I think that's it for questions. Aaron, want to take it away?
Awesome, great. Yeah, I want to thank everyone again. So Anith, Dwight, Jonathan, Caroline, Cheryl, thank you for all your expertise. And I think the audience agrees that we had a fantastic last few hours here and learned quite a bit. I do want to thank our sponsors as well. So Cooper Vision, Felicia Timmerman, Done For You Marketing, Trish Olson, at Neo Home Loans, Josh Metal, DGH Ultrasound, Russell Schwaj, and finally Dr. Contact Lens, Jen Tavisa, and also Brianna Ruth. So I want to thank all of you for making this possible. And we have one more raffle before we close this thing out. So let's take a look at our randomizer, see who the winner is. I know I've still got about 550 people on. This is great. And our winner is Steven Sorkin. So Steven Sorkin,
Hey.
You have won the $100 gift card. So email us admin@ODsonFinance.com and we'll send that over to you so you get paid for attending this free CE. What could be better? All right, but once again, panelists, want to thank you again. Vision by Design, definitely register for that. You're going to see all of these panelists, all these speakers there, and you're going to get just more and more myopia management, and it's going to be more than you know what to do with, and you're going to become a great practitioner from it. And with that, one more thank you to everyone. Any last words in this, since you've kind of hosting this whole thing?
I want to thank all the sponsors. Thank you for supporting this. Thank you to the ODsonFinance team, and thank you for everybody that attended. I know it's tough to come out on a Sunday to listen to 3 hours of CE, but hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll do more together. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great Sunday, and we'll see you at the next event. We're going to all sign off.